Hello, my name is Sarah Jones and I'm Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Computing, Engineering and Media at De Montfort University. And I'm both honoured and privileged to be able to welcome you to this really exciting day that we've got lined up ahead. It's nearly a year since I started at De Montfort University. Managing our faculty through this global pandemic wasn't something I thought I would be doing in that first year. But what it has shown me is how strong the networks are at DMU, the support, the innovations, and that real drive and commitment to continuous improvement. I've been fortunate to have found so much inspiration from the women at DMU, and much of that inspiration you're going to be hearing about today. And there is a great lineup ahead. TEDx was launched at DMU to help students, staff, and alumni, as well as the local community. It's all about developing that entrepreneurial mindset, to be inspired and to be motivated, and they're all things we all need right now. This event has been co-organised by DMU Women and DMU Works Enterprise. DMU Women is for women who work and study here, as well as our graduates, our local, our global communities, and all of our partners. It's a network I'm really proud to be part of, with the aim to encourage women to feel confident, to feel listened to feel supported in their work and study. DMU Works Enterprise offers so many services, all helping to promote that entrepreneurial mind and to get the ideas going, the ideas that are so ripe amongst our community, to get them all off the ground. They do this with one-to-one business support, online startups, placement years, and competitions. Now, the ethos of TED events is always about ideas worth spreading. And there are enough ideas at De Montfort University for us to run events like this every day, every week. But this is our second annual TEDx. And the first one was led by one of our PhD students, Jane Hurst. She kicked it off. So I'm delighted to be able to hand over to her now. So get ready to be inspired by these great stories from women really inspiring social change. Jane, over to you.
Hello. So as she introduced, I'm Jane Hurst. I'm the founder of the Curious Observer, something that was supported by DMU Enterprise. And I'm also a PhD student at De Montfort in Arts for Health. Something that I've always found interesting is the idea of power. I believe there's two different types of power. The kind that we typically think, which is a social power associated with the impact we have over others. And then there's the power that we hold within ourselves, the type associated with integrity, values, and authenticity. When Simon, part of DMU Enterprise, asked me last year to arrange the first TEDx event, my first thought was, do I really have time for this alongside a PhD? But it made me think about this idea of power. I've always been someone that prioritizes the power associated with integrity above the power associated with social control. By being in a position to create a TEDx event, it meant that I had a bit of both and I could affect the values that underpin the event. I was keen to get speakers who prioritized authenticity and the power of their voice, but who didn't necessarily have the same type of social control based on the structures of our society that don't prioritize the type of people that they may be. At the end of last year's event, as extraordinary as it was, I was wondering whether it was worth all the time that went into it. It's quite an exhausting process. And I didn't necessarily know the answer to that question until this year's event, when I've seen all the different speakers who are involved in this event, and I've seen the type of values that they are representing. I knew it was beyond worth the effort of creating last year's. Every single speaker on this stage today is carrying a profound amount of integrity and authenticity in what they do. To see that the values instilled into this event have been carried over into a second year, and that together we represent the change we want to see in the future, has left me feeling hopeful, empowered, and truly inspired. My hope today is that you will leave the event feeling even a proportion of what that emotion that I'm feeling right now, and that you may be inspired by these incredible speakers. I'm now going to pass you over to Yasmin from DMU Women, who will introduce a bit more about this year's event. Yasmin, we can't hear you at the moment.
Sorry all, some slight technical difficulties there. Good morning. I am delighted to be with you today. My name is Yasmin Ali and I'm co-chair of the DMU Women Network. Thank you to Sarah and Jane for the brilliant introduction to our second annual DMU Women TEDx event today. The purpose of TEDx events is to bring something new and inspiring to local audiences. And with Leicester being the first city to experience an extended lockdown, we wanted to bring our communities together at an event that would uplift you all. And what better way to do that than to hold space for and celebrate the amazing women who are leading social change in Leicester. We have a belief and hope that what you hear today will inform, educate and move you. The speakers will challenge your beliefs, your perspectives and possibly even your behaviours. And who knows what they will inspire you to do after this event. The ethos behind TEDx is at the heart of the work of DMU Works Enterprise, our student and graduate enterprise team led by Simon Baines, who's going to be one of your co-hosts today, and DMU Women. We believe in providing platforms for our students, staff, alumni, and local communities to shine and showcase their talent and creativity. And we really can't be more brilliant speakers today. Obviously, we would have loved to have held this event in person and met you all, but the beauty of an online event is that you can relax in your own home, tune in whilst you're working, from wherever is comfortable for you, really. And we're delighted to have you all with us today. We've got 650 people listening in right now, so you're in really good company. Unfortunately, we don't have a chat facility available today, but we would like to know what you think of the event as we're progressing throughout the next couple of hours. And more importantly, it would be great if you could show your support and appreciation to all of our speakers who've worked really hard to bring TEDx to you today. So if you do have social media, please use the hashtag DeMontfortUWomen. Show your support to our speakers. Let us know what you're thinking. And if you could tag in some key accounts for us, that would be great too. DMU Women, DMU Works Enterprise, DMU Leicester and DMU Events. We really want to hear from you. We're online, so we may experience some Wi-Fi issues, as you've noticed just now, some technical issues. Bear with us, they'll be resolved quickly and we'll always keep you informed about what's coming up and what's happening at every step of the way. There'll also be lots of comfort breaks. Again, the beauty of being in your own home, you can go and grab a cup of tea, see to the kids, deal with any small tasks that pop up. All we're asking from you today is to relax, to listen, to enjoy and think about what you might do next. I'm going to hand you over to Simon Baines now, who is the co-host along with Jane Hurst. He is a huge supporter of DMU Women, and I'm really proud to have delivered this event to you today with Simon. Simon, I'm going to pass on to you.
Thank you, Yasmin, and good morning, everyone. I never imagined I would be hosting a TEDx from my living room, but this is 2020 and everything's out the window, isn't it? So anything could happen today. We have our first speaker coming right up for you, and you're going to be blown away by the ideas that you hear today. If you've never come across TEDx, if you don't know what a TEDx conference is, they are watched by millions of people all over the world. Our event that Jane mentioned earlier that we did this time last year, the videos from that event have already been watched by more than 16,000 people online. These ideas are going far and wide, and you'll hear a lot today all about our city, but anything, all these ideas that will resonate with you no matter where you are in the world. Here to tell you a little bit more about TEDx is the official TEDx video.
TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theatres, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Hello again. So it is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker. Next up is Shadia Briscoe Palmer. She is a lecturer in media, race and social injustices at De Montfort University. Her research specialisms intersect across the politics of gender, race and social injustices. Her research focus explores the politics of Black masculinity whilst deconstructing post-colonial identities. Shadia's research interests include academic diversity and inclusivity challenges faced by minority groups within higher education. She completed her doctorate at University of Birmingham in political science and international studies. She is a strong advocate on why and how race and its intersections must be addressed adequately in higher education. She's also a mother of 2 boys, and she spends many of her days navigating the world around them, being their example for change. She can be found via Twitter at Shadia B. Palmer, so be sure to tweet her if you comment about her post. Here is Shadia.
Excuse me, miss, but you seem to have missed me out. That is something I told my son to say the next time his teacher fails to be inclusive within the classroom. That is something I am extremely proud of, where I feel that I made a change. Now, to put some context into what I've just said, my 6-year-old son at the time came home with a piece of homework. It was to research some inspirational, influential history within women, within society, within history. Now, when I looked at the list, and the usuals were there, you had your Florence Nightingales and your Margaret Thatchers and so on, I noticed something was missing: race. And right there and then, I became raged. I became angry. I wanted to march down to that school and say, how could you miss something so significant? But then I also realized I had a responsibility to educate and to make a change. So very pleasantly and politely, I went to the school and I spoke with the teacher and explained to her that through your remissions, you not only have informed my son that nobody that looks like him has done anything influential in history, you've also educated his peers to think that anybody that looks like my son has done very little, if anything at all, to contribute to society. A very long story short, the homework was recalled and sent back out. And to my happiness, it was inclusive of race and ethnicity. We had on there Rosa Parks and Jessica Ennis Smith. And this was significant and fundamental in that it not only made a difference and benefited my son and his peers, it also changed the perspectives of the parents and guardians doing the homework with the children. Now, me being me, I supported my son in researching NASA's human computer, Katherine Jenkins, and he submitted that. But the reason why I share this story with you is to demonstrate through this example how, as women, we are leading social change. Many women live their daily lives impacting society, making a difference within their communities. However, these same women are unaware of the leadership skills they exhibit and the differences that they are making. Now, you may not feel that you benefit from the difference that you're making, or even feel that you're making a difference at all. But the people surrounding you, the people watching you, are the ones that benefit from the differences, the changes, the influence that you are having on society. Through an activist attitude, we all can make a social change. And the activism required for these changes are not necessarily huge national campaigns where we walk into Parliament and, demand a eradication on tampon tax, or if it's a celebrity-led campaign to feed the country's most poorest children through a global pandemic. But it's all the gestures, however big and small, that make a difference, whether that be at work, in the home, and yes, in the school playground. Think about the last time that you've heard a statement or someone's perspective and you've disagreed and you've wanted to say something but you didn't. You just walked away, and you could kick yourself for walking away. For me, the last time this happened was when my husband was going away for the weekend. My child, then 4, whilst embracing him to say goodbye, my husband uttered, "Whilst Daddy's gone, you will be the man of the house." Now, these are words said before. Many of us have heard them previously. And you could say they're quite innocent. But for me, they were a problem. Because when you place a 4-year-old, our 4-year-old, as the man of the house, where does that leave me? Where does that leave me, his mother, the adult, in this whole situation? Now, putting aside the unhealthy constructions of masculinity, that in itself is a separate talk. Again, I found myself in a position of rage, quite angry. But I didn't want to upset the home. I didn't want to upset my husband leaving. But I knew I had a responsibility again to educate and make a change. So I spoke with my husband, and together we made a change. This change now impacted his perspective, but also it would make a difference on the people that he engaged with and the conversations that he exhibited. Now, I know I'm not the Archangel Gabriel going around changing the world for the better. However, what I said previously about it not necessarily having to be something big and national and global, it's the things that we do and say on a foundational level that make an impact, that influence, that are demonstrating us in our social change. Now, just to bring us to my final point, I also want to emphasize the importance, the significance of not taking part. And that might sound a little contradictory into what I've just spoke about. But as women, we often find ourselves in positions, sometimes at work, where we are exploited for our identities, or we are given a seat at the table due to tokenistic reasons. But it's okay in that moment to get up and say, "No, thank you, I'm not going to participate." And that in itself is demonstrating that activist attitude required for social change that we all have within us. Now, you may feel that that movement, that campaign, that change is important and significant, and you'll just take one for the team. However, your self-worth, your self-value, and you saying no demonstrates you leading change, a change to make a difference to that type of attitude. You may not feel like a leader, and as women, many of us do not. We do not identify with those characteristics or attributes because we are constructed not to. But your action, your activism, however small you believe it to be, is making a change that impacts and influences society. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Shadia. That was a really, really great talk. And it made me reflect on all the kind of movements that have been happening this year, particularly Black Lives Matter kind of came to mind. There has been so many people, even just within my own social circle, who had all this strong motivation to do something and then felt overwhelmed by the idea that they had to do something big. And I think recognizing that small steps can be absolutely vital in making change is a really powerful statement to make. So thank you for that. Next, I'll hand over to Simon, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you. Don't forget, if you're watching us today, please join in the conversation on social media. The hashtag is hashtag De Montfort, TEDx De Montfort U Women. TEDx De Montfort U Women. Our next speaker is Professor Jo Richardson. Jo is a professor of housing and social inclusion at De Montfort University. With her work, Jo conducts research on housing, working with local, national and international community partners. Passionate about finding a sustainable solution to homelessness, Jo is interested around the concept of home and asks through her work what we mean by that term. You can find out more about Jo's work in her recent book, Place and Identify, The Performance of Home. And if you're interested in what you hear from Jo today, you can follow her on Twitter. Her handle is @socialhousing. We are very pleased to welcome our next speaker today, Professor Jo Richardson.
Thank you and hello. Who do we as a society want to be? I want to offer you a vision of our world where we can all feel at home, where no one has to sleep on a pavement or in a doorway. I want us to imagine a society where we can all feel at home, a world which is homeful rather than homeless. The reasons behind individual homeless stories can be varied and complex. But what if I told you that the solution to homelessness is simple, that it can be done, that homelessness can be ended for good? I want to let you into an obvious secret. Housing is the solution to homelessness. Housing first, with support, is the way to help people rebuild their lives. Not housing last as a prize for survival through myriad temporary shelters. But why should you be interested in being part of the homeless solution? Can you recall that feeling when you walk past a homeless person, sitting on a pavement in the rain? What goes through your mind? What do you feel? What do you wish you could do? You may feel helpless, but let me tell you clearly today, we can all be involved in solving homelessness. This is an enormous challenge and it can feel overwhelming. But lend me your time for the next 10 minutes and I will show you why this is such an important issue to tackle now and what you can do to contribute towards ending homelessness for good. Nearly 30 years ago, straight out of school and with the experience of having come from a loving and protective family home, I volunteered with New York City Relief to help homeless people. I vividly recall talking with young and old, men and women with hard-worn lives etched on their faces. As volunteers, we rose before dawn, cooked soup for hundreds, loaded up a bus with donations from local bakeries, information leaflets about housing and employment, and first aid equipment to help treat superficial wounds and injuries. But when I asked one young man I met what meant the most to him about the New York City Relief support, he surprised me with his answer. It wasn't the food, the clothes, the first aid. It was the connection that I had asked him who he was. In that moment, he felt he had regained his humanity, his identity beyond another homeless person. That month in 1991 changed me, changed my outlook, my presumptions, and my hopes for the future world that I wanted to live in. I realised then what I know now through my research. Homelessness isn't a personal characteristic. It is instead an effect of social policy failure, a result of insufficient, properly affordable and sustainable housing. But what makes me angry is that we're still talking about this decades on. I'm passionate about housing and home. I want to live in a world where everyone is able to feel at home. I am impatient to find a solution that we can all contribute to. The benefit of ending homelessness for us all is a more humane, harmonious society. But there are also financial benefits too. It is expensive for councils to rent houses and rooms on a nightly rate to provide emergency shelter for families. Recent analysis shows that councils in England spent almost 1.2 billion on temporary accommodation between April 2019 and March 2020. It is expensive for the NHS to treat the health-related consequences of homelessness. Billions are spent on treating the symptoms of inequality, poverty, and homelessness. Vulnerable homeless people are also exploited and victims of crime. If money was spent instead on providing social housing for rent for those in need now and generations to come, there will be savings, social and financial, in the long run. We have a problem. How many people do you think are sleeping rough in England today? 4,266 people are counted as sleeping rough in England today, and this official figure is likely to be a vast undercount. What's the percentage increase in homelessness, do you suppose, over the last 10 years? Over the last 10 years, the figure has risen by over 140%. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Across the globe, millions of people are living in precarious, insecure, sometimes dangerous accommodation. We see rough sleeping in our city, Leicester, and we know from our research some of the issues, particularly affecting homeless women, are the result of trauma. Homelessness can cause poor health, even premature death, difficulty accessing education and employment, which means it's difficult to afford housing. It becomes a vicious cycle, costly to the individual and to society. The best way to end homelessness is to consider housing, properly affordable social housing, as the first key intervention. Recent analysis suggests that 1.6 million people are on the waiting list for council or housing association housing. Social housing stock has been depleted, and we have not been building enough to replace it. So, a bleak landscape. Rough sleeping is on the rise, waiting lists of housing are sky, but the glimmer of hope? A global pandemic. Let me explain more. Who noticed the Everyone In campaign in England? Homeless people sleeping rough were immediately given interim accommodation and support in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And some have since secured permanent accommodation. This gives us a glimpse into the possible future, a glimmer of hope that we can mobilise quickly, we can work together to effect rapid change. This was, in fact, one of the fastest public health interventions in recent times. An accidental, pandemic-induced experiment brought people in off the street for their own and wider public safety. If we can do this in a pandemic, then why not in ordinary times too? Unfortunately, we're already starting to see more rough sleeping again. But now is the time to capitalise on the success of everyone in. We must not go back to business as usual. Let me tell you about how we do this. My research over the last 20 years has shown that there are 6 conditions necessary to create home. And you can see them here on the slide. But for now, let's focus on 3 of these 6 conditions. 1, security of tenure, looking beyond temporary accommodation. 2, connectedness, between people, getting to know homeless people and their stories. And 3, affordability, properly affordable social homes to rent. These 3 elements of home are what we should be focusing our energy on in our quest to end homelessness for good. But first, let me dispel a couple of myths about resolving homelessness. Contrary to popular myth, we are not all equally 2 or 3 paychecks away from homelessness. There is inequality in the exposure to potential homelessness. Poverty is a precursor to housing precarity and homelessness. It is as simple as that. It is also not true that temporary innovations are the answer either. Here are some recent examples that have made the headlines. From wheelie bin homeless pods to crisp packet blankets, shipping container flats to miniature modular shelters. Some of these ideas do alleviate the symptoms of living on the street, but they do not solve homelessness. They do not come from a premise of starting to solve homelessness with housing. Imagine if you or your parents or your child had no home to go to, that as a result of a sudden crisis, you were faced with sleeping on a friend's sofa with no longer term options, or worse, on the street. If you could wave a magic wand with solutions to your homelessness, would any of these options be in your dreams? Or would you be hoping for a solution that looked more like some of these? Quality, secure, safe, private, connected, and affordable homes. Social housing, housing first with unconditional support, is the solution to homelessness. We do not need so-called innovative products as a sticking plaster for homelessness. We need to remember that secure and affordable housing with support is the answer. We should all have the human right of a safe and affordable place to call home. We can all work together to create a society that has that value at its heart. The overall solution is more secure and affordable housing. There is a 3-pronged approach to delivering this. 1, at government level, through funding to build properly affordable homes for rent, so that housing first is a credible option to solve homelessness. We all need to support government to make this decision part of their housing policy and to hold them to account for its implementation. 2, at community level, we can mobilise and connect, such that we saw with everyone in England. The thing that we have in common is that we're all human. And we know from examples in the USA with the Community Solutions 100,000 Home Programme and in Europe from World Habitat's campaign, how important it is to homeless people that we connect. ask their name and their story before trying to impose a solution. At an individual level, and this is number 3, we all have the power to influence in our communities through the use of our voice. We can play our part in reframing the homelessness debate, connecting with and contributing to a housing-led solution. And let me leave you with this. There is another way. By connecting with homeless people, providing them with safe and secure accommodation first, along with unconditional support, we can stop the revolving door of street homelessness. We can build places from which people can create a home. This is what you can do now to make your own contribution to ending homelessness. Just on the last slide, please. Number 1, make a connection. Eye contact and a smile with homeless people. Reflect on the stories you tell yourself about homelessness. Remember, we are all human beings. Number 2, engage with your local council's housing development plans in your area. You can look at these online. Ask if there is enough affordable rented accommodation planned. And number 3, join the Homeful campaign, which focuses on inclusive action research in order to provide evidence for policymakers and to influence decision-making to end homelessness for good. I hope you can see that housing really is the solution to end homelessness and that we all have a part to play. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. I'm just reflecting on those points at the end and what people watching this can go away and do. Just briefly, is it very common that people with the issue of homelessness think it's somebody else's problem to deal with?
I'm not sure people think it's somebody else's problem, but it can seem overwhelming, as I said. It can seem like, well, what can I do as an individual? But there's something that we can all do. I think very many people like to donate to charity. They like to buy homeless people food or sleeping bags. And this is very kind. This is a way of connecting as human beings, but it doesn't solve homelessness. It treats the symptoms of homelessness around poverty and hunger and not having a shelter. What we need to do as a society to structurally end homelessness is to build sufficient quality, affordable housing. And that we can still contribute to, although it feels like it's a very big structural thing. We can contribute to this, as I say, and just on the last slide, I don't think the last slide showed, but it had the three points. And one of the things I'm going to do is run a campaign called Homeful, to try and help people connect as part of a piece of research. So you can get involved that way. But just simply being open-minded to the development needs in a local town or city or village, to look at the plans for a neighbourhood and to see whether or not there is sufficient affordable social housing. Sometimes this housing isn't always welcomed. It's not always built readily by developers. Some people have assumptions around what social housing is. But again, we need to ask questions of ourselves and who we think is part of society, who we think is part of our community, and reflect on that. And there are ways that we can contribute to this large structural change that's necessary.
Jo, thank you so much for this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's Tuesday, the 24th of November, 2020. We're completely live. It's TEDx De Montfort You Women, and thank you for staying with us today. We have some fantastic speakers coming up for you. Next, we're going to watch a very special spoken word performance. This is called Fearless.
Bask in my majesty, bounce on my woman breast, clear the way for me, take a bow for me, learn to deal with me. For I will continue to step out into the darkness at the crack of dawn, into the unknown, to chase success, to compete, to immerse myself in the tongues of fire that rage around me. It's daunting, but I do it because that's just what I do. For I'm the matriarch, the epitome of courage, of fearlessness, of burning desire, and of battle quality. A hurricane so formidable, so intoxicatingly potent. And my life must be a book of woman history, of woman heritage, the ferocious legacy of a queen who hungers and thirsts for a life that is so unapologetic in every possible way. I am the matriarch. I am the queen. I am the woman that every woman must be. I am fearless.
This is TEDx to Montfort You Women. It's brought to you by the DMU Women's Network and DMU Works Enterprise, DMU's student and graduate enterprise team. Please take this as an opportunity to kick back, get away from business as usual, and take some time to reflect on the messages and the ideas that are coming through today. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who I know will really make you think.
Well, because like what happened to me, I've been silent about it most of my life. And I was thinking, I'm not getting anything out of staying silent. So yeah, I want to help by providing my experience. That's what I'm trying to break here. That's why I say, let's talk about it. Let's break the silence. I would love to talk about it. It's a healing to talk about things. After it happened, I was expected to stay quiet. I'd just be quiet in shame and humility because I felt like people would judge me. And I love my parents and they would judge my parents. It's only recently that I've been like, there's no point in me staying quiet because it's not right and it can't be justified in any way for it happening to me. I have a daughter now and I don't want to do it. Although my pain was very less, I just don't want to do it with my daughter. My daughter is growing up in a different culture and she grew up in a different place. And that place and culture, the people, don't know this thing. Women before me, the initiative that women before me actually made, and then indirectly it influenced my mum. And because of that, I'm a product of that. And look, a few years before that, my sister was subject to type 3, you know, severe type FGM. These quotes are from women who participated in my PhD research. They had all experienced female genital cutting, where part or all of the female genitalia is removed for non-medical reasons. Do you know how many women and girls are affected by female genital cutting today? It is estimated that around 200 million women and girls are living with female genital cutting around the world. Female genital cutting, or FGC for short, is carried out for many reasons, but one of the most common reasons in my research was surrounding conforming to gender norms and controlling of sexuality. The women in my research, in one way or another, created, embodied, and lived social change. Some changed their beliefs around ownership of the body, so that instead of this idea of a communal body where the community get to make decisions about the body, they took ownership and claimed an individual body where only they could make decisions about their body. Other women dared to speak about their sexual pleasure and advocated women learning their own bodies prior to entering relationships. Some had reconstruction surgery, and others had defibrillation surgery as a way to embody these changes. Most of the women resisted female genital cutting for their own daughters, and some were activists in a traditional sense of raising awareness within the community, but they all equally triggered social change. For decades, women across the world and the continent of Africa have been enabling social change around FGC. An example of this is the Gamco trap in the Gambia. Established in 1984, it has since been campaigning against female genital cutting. They have been working with communities to reach consensus that FGC should not be practiced, and when they do, they hold a dropping of the knife ceremony. Some of this social change has been supported with the circumcisers learning new skills to make a living, such as animal rearing and jewellery making. Whilst these women are bravely creating social change, I think it's really important that as researchers and academics, we create our own social change. Firstly, we need to recognise as researchers that there is a historical trauma associated to research in many Indigenous and post-colonial communities. We need to be mindful of the triggers that research can have, such as memories of interrogation and exploitation, such as having knowledge stolen and misinterpreted from both historic and current processes of colonisation. Research needs to be a collaboration so that we are researching with and not on communities. Part of decolonising the research process involves pushing back when we receive pushback to change. An example of this is when I told someone I was using intersectionality theory by Kimberly Crenshaw. Their first response was to email me 2 white Swedish female academics who had looked at intersectionality post-Crenshaw. My response, after rolling my eyes, was to question why I would not solely use the work of Crenshaw, given that she had coined the term and brought these intersections of injustice to light, as well as Sojourner Truth with her speech in 1851, Ain't I a Woman? In addition to this, we need to stop applying Eurocentric ideas and standards of the body and womanhood, and consider non-Western ideas of the body and community. So, if you're wondering why this presentation didn't start with the traditional introduction of who I am and what I do, it's because I'm participating in my own social change. Where you don't hear about me first, but you hear from the women who participated in my research to amplify their voices. Until one day this becomes the norm of research and academia, where we start with the lived experience and narrative as opposed to Western theory. My name is Dr. Paris Connolly, and I studied here at DMU and have lived in Leicester my whole life. But my family haven't, so how did I get here? I am a product of social change. It all started with my great-grandma who moved to Leicester from Goa, India in 1955, after travelling 7,059 nautical miles. That's 29 days at sea. When she arrived in little and cold Leicester, she worked in a light bulb factory. My grandma, who was 5 when she came to Leicester, completed secondary school and later in her life trained as a nursing auxiliary. It wasn't until my mum went to university to train as a midwife at DMU when I was 11 that I realised I myself could go to university. And I'm the first person in my family to have a PhD, which may not have happened had my great-grandma not made that journey across the sea. My closing message for you is that social change starts with our principles, our mindset, our willingness to step out of our comfort zones for what we believe in. It starts with conversations and our individual actions which create collective, tangible social change. We shouldn't get disheartened if we don't see immediate change. Who knows what impact we will have in generations to come? The social change that you may believe is not having an impact can in fact change the course of the future. It starts with her, it starts with you, and it starts with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paris. I was sitting there in your presentation feeling tears coming to my eyes going, oh no, I'm going to be on the screen soon. That was a really emotional presentation, and thank you for delivering it. I will introduce you first so that everyone knows a bit more background about you now that your presentation is done. And then I have just a couple of questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So this is Dr. Paris Connolly. She is a senior lecturer in the Leicester Business School at De Montfort University. She's a research fellow working on the Decolonising DMU project. Paris was awarded a PhD in sociology in 2019. Her thesis was titled Female Genital Cutting in the UK, a feminist phenomenological study of perceptions and lived experiences. She also completed her BA honours in health studies here at De Montfort University and was awarded a first-class degree. And she has worked as a domestic abuse practitioner for Women's Aid and is interested in trauma-based approaches. She is interested in researching issues around gender and sexuality, race and ethnicity, human rights and violence against women and girls, feminist research methods, and arts-based methods. I think the main thing that I wanted to reflect on first was that approach of quoting people from your study. I thought was incredibly powerful. Thank you for doing that. And I wanted to ask, how do you envisage researchers can be more open in allowing those voices to be the center, particularly when you're gathering that information?
I think for me, it really starts with planning of the research. So who sets the agenda? Is it the researchers or is it the communities that you're actually doing the research with? And using approaches like phenomenology, grounded theory, participatory approaches where the participants of the research really get a voice the whole way throughout and can participate in maybe going through the questions, making sure that they're culturally sensitive, deciding which terminology you're using, and giving women especially the opportunity to kind of like self-identify. So the term female genital cutting isn't often used in policy and law. It's usually mutilation. But it's that question of who are we to say that women are mutilated if they don't feel mutilated themselves? And it's given that space for them to put themselves in the research.
I really liked your idea on who we reference as the sort of founders and creators of theories and methodologies. I forgot what my follow-up to, to that was. I guess my idea is then, do you welcome those people when you're co-designing with them? Do you welcome them to help shape those methodologies as well as part of that?
I guess it depends on what stage of your research you're at. So like for the PhD, it depends because you have to have some sort of ownership in terms of the research and setting the agenda, because that's the nature of the research that you're doing, as opposed to when you've already qualified and can kind of have a bit more ownership over that. So I think it really depends at what stage of your career you're at. But there's definitely ways you can do that throughout, regardless of whether it's undergraduate level or post-PhD level.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your ideas today. And next up, I will be introducing our next speaker. This is Dr. Natasha Katuta Mawila. I really apologise if I've said that name wrong. Senior lecturer at Leicester Business School. She was born in Zambia and has studied and lived in Australia, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. She is a business management academic with a passion for women's enterprising. She's a Christian woman, a proud mother, and she is happily married also. Her motivation to speak on women and identity is driven by her own life journey and her desire to make a positive difference in the life of those she has the privilege of encountering. Next up, it's Natasha.
I am an academic. As far as my research goes, I'm a case methodologist. In other words, a glorified storyteller. So today, I am staying true to form and doing just that. Telling you a story about a young woman called Anna. A story that many young women will resonate with, at least in part. But I cannot tell you Anna's story without telling you a bit of my own. I am the product of the proverbial strong Black woman. My mother, Beatrice Nani Nzumula, is the epitome of what many young Black girls aspire to. A devoted Christian woman, highly educated, has worked hard all her life and continues to, even in her retirement. She has had a successful career, charitable in her causes, dedicated to her family. My mother raised us single-handedly after my father's death when I was only 10. I cannot lie, I lacked nothing because I was raised by this woman. I grew up in awe of her, aspiring to be even just a fraction of who she is. Now, let's turn to Anna. Anna was one of my students, one of several that I taught in a module 1 year. Hardly a noticeable student, except that she was always late, with the biggest sunglasses on, and was one to have a casual snooze during the lecture, even when she was late. One day, she came crying hysterically to my office. She was distraught about having failed an assignment. In between tears, she asked me, "Miss, can I resubmit?" I firmly responded, "You know the rules," and I went on to recite university policy. She retorted, "But I just needed more time." "Why didn't you ask for more time?" I asked. She was silent, dead silent. I changed gear to mother mode. "Talk to me, Anna. I want to help you." At that moment, those words seemed to open the floodgates. She began sharing with me her home life. Her mom was a night shift factory worker. Her dad had divorced her mom and no longer lived in the home. Anna was the oldest of 5 children. When her mom was at work, Anna was in effect the substitute mom of the family, cooking, cleaning, helping the younger ones with homework. She shared that the youngest had physical and mental disabilities and highly specialized needs, and that her dad left when he realized that the youngest child would have these conditions. This was too much for me. I was holding back tears. I wanted to stop her and redirect her to counseling support. But I felt my mouth couldn't move. She continued, "I am struggling and really trying my best to cope with everything at home, my part-time job, and at uni. Everyone I have reached out to tells me that I should be strong, that I should be grateful that I'm in the UK, that if I were back in Africa, things would be harder. They remind me that I should not complain because I am the eldest, that all I'm doing is my responsibility, that all this will make me a strong woman and a good wife." I was livid. I could not believe that this was society's response to a young woman's legitimate cry for help. I had to put my emotion aside and mask it with my question. I asked her again, "Why didn't you ask for more time on your assignment, Anna?" She replied meekly, "I didn't want to disappoint you." My emotions swung from being upset to complete shock. My shock was only interrupted by her continuation. "Look at you, miss. You're Black. Not just Black. You're African. You're a woman. You look like me. You have achieved so much. You're strong, and I want to be like you. I don't want you to think I'm just another lazy Black student. You see me coming late to class. You see me doze off. How could I ask? I am sorry to disappoint you." Now, I was the one silent. I hardly knew this young lady. I couldn't believe that she thought that I had such intimate, high expectations of her. The word disappointment was too heavy, and it sent me into my own world of reflection. I was humbled that she saw me as strong, and I thought of my mom, my own reference point, the embodiment of the quintessential strong Black woman. Yet I am quite different from her. The beauty of my own story is that my mother allowed me to define myself, embrace my difference, and recognize my own strength within, my strength as a Black woman, not according to societal expectations, but according to my own aspirations. This is a gift I was determined to share with Anna and everyone else like her. I am tired. I am tired of being a strong Black woman. If being strong means that we cannot be open about our struggles and weaknesses. If we cannot say no to what we do not desire at work, at home, and in our society. If being Black means we have to minimize our Blackness to make others more comfortable. If we have to fit into the boxes of acceptable perceptions of Blackness. If we cannot make choices that benefit us without being accused of not having Black pride. If being a woman means we are only included in the discussion as a token of equality. If our femininity is used as a lens to judge our actions and is used to take away from any merit in what we stand for and our fitness for opportunity. The discourse on our identity as strong Black women needs to change. And that change needs to start with how we, strong Black women, see ourselves, how we perceive strength, Blackness, and womanhood. Anna's story is just one of many that I have heard. These stories are not going away because we have a broader societal problem in how we as Black women identify ourselves. We have a difficult time navigating through home life, scholarly studies, and the workplace because of the burden of this label of strong Black women. We are burdened with representing an entire race and are suffocated by systems that do not acknowledge our differences nor our experiences. We cannot immediately rectify the formal and informal institutions that shape our negative experiences, but we can certainly alter our own appraisal of self. This message is for any woman that has ever felt less than, not strong enough, not Black enough, not woman enough. Why does this societal label of strong Black woman matter? Labels are the headliners of identity. Identity influences what we believe we can achieve, and therein lies the barrier. The moment we claim an identity that we cannot live up to, our self-doubt sets in. Our ambitions drop from sky high to knee high. At best, we feel like imposters in our own identity. And at worst, we feel like failures. Allow me to share with you what I told Anna, not in our initial meeting, but in several meetings later. What makes you strong is not the amount of stress that you can withstand. You are strong for being able to recognize what you can cope with and what you cannot. Your womanhood is not relegated to the domestic chores that you are tasked with performing. Before being a woman, you are human. You are allowed to be tired and to get frustrated. And when you're tired and frustrated, talk about it. Journal it. Pray it. You are Black. Melanin is in your skin. What else? You hail from Africa. What else? Who are you, Anna? Please describe yourself without using the adjectives strong, Black, and woman. Anna could not respond in the moment. I gave her the opportunity to leave my office, reflect on the question, and respond when she was ready. Many weeks passed. I didn't think I'd hear from Anna again. And then I saw an email in my inbox that read, "Hi, Miss. Sorry I have been quiet. I have been busy with graduation preparations." Yes, I am actually graduating. In response to the homework that you gave me, this is my answer. I am human, created in God's image. I have a bright future ahead. Thank you for allowing me to see myself differently. Thank you for hearing me. Your favorite student, Anna. It all starts within. How we choose to see ourselves is how we will be seen. I am proud to be a strong Black woman, not because I tick any boxes, but because to me, that means I accept my weaknesses. Therein lies my strength. I ask for help. I celebrate my heritage. I have a history that has shaped who I am. I am as I was designed to be and will pursue what is good for me. I will leave my mark on the world as a strong Black woman by simply being me. Thank you.
Wow. We told you today's talks would make you think, didn't we? And whether you're a lecturer, a member of staff, a student, a graduate, a member of the public watching this, the power of these talks, the ideas we're hearing today can resonate with all of us, I'm sure. Now, many of the issues that we're hearing about today are relevant in normal life, and some are even more prevalent now in this pandemic. We're going to take a short comfort break soon, but before that, we'd like you to watch this important video about addressing gender-based violence within a pandemic.
That has come to define 2020. Understandably, COVID-19 has dominated the world's agenda, and mandatory lockdowns were introduced in many countries to help control the spread of the virus. For many of us, the lockdown was inconvenient. We couldn't go to our normal places of business, we couldn't visit family or friends, and we couldn't socialize publicly. But for some people, though the freedom to get out of the house was not just a matter of convenience, but of physical safety and even life or death. Based on my work, I see the great majority of those vulnerable people are women. And this resonates with me, especially today, as I give my talk from the safety of my home. As a practicing obstetrician and gynecologist, I am also aware of the prevalence of gender-based violence in communities across Nigeria. And this is why I founded the Women at Risk International Foundation, WARIF, in 2016, in response to this. Global estimates published by the WHO indicate that 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced an act of violence. And this was before the lockdown. In March, an increase in the number of cases of violence against women was becoming apparent across the world, amounting to a shadow pandemic that we are now faced with globally. In France, for example, there was a 30% increase in the number of cases of domestic violence. And in Argentina, emergency calls from domestic violence cases increased by 25%. In the first 2 weeks of the lockdown in Lagos State, our emergency phone lines rang non-stop, and we recorded a 64% increase in calls from women trapped at home with abusers in fear for their lives. By June, the authorities became aware of the shadow pandemic, and a state of emergency on rape was declared by the federal government of Nigeria. As we fielded the distressing calls from girls and women, young and old, we were able to help, as thankfully we kept the WARIF Rape Crisis Center open as a refuge of last resort. In the more remote areas, many women had to walk miles to receive any medical care and attention, as there was no transportation because of the lockdown. They had no internet access to reach social media platforms, and they had limited phone services to call a 24-hour confidential helpline or even a neighbor. So the situation for these women was much worse. Our solution in addressing this was this. There are over 3,000 traditional birth attendants working in rural areas across Lagos State today. These are community-based men and women who have been informally trained and provide basic healthcare to both women and expectant mothers. But none of them had received any form of training to help women suffering from domestic violence. We successfully trained 1,300 of these community gatekeepers as first responders in addressing the cases of violence against women in their communities. This meant during the lockdown, they were galvanized to go house to house in their communities, and with their training, were able to offer the necessary assistance to women trapped at home, unable to receive care. Reports varied from verbal and emotional abuse to far worse beatings and sexual violence. But those home visits served as an opportunity for these women to share their stories and to receive the much needed care and support that the traditional birth attendants offered. This program has been rolled out across an additional 7 local communities and has reached nearly 35,000 people, raising awareness of the shadow pandemic in these communities. In the months to come, we plan on including our other gatekeepers, the law enforcement officials, and the religious leaders, truly impacting on communities and on the safety and the lives of these women. As we embrace the new normal of working remotely from home and with online schooling, it is more than likely that more women will be trapped at home with their abusers, and this shadow pandemic will persist. But I take hope and inspiration from the courage and determination of the many who work to protect and support these women. I have been awed by the unbelievable strength and the tenacity that these women have shown during these precarious times, and their ability to find their power in spite of all of this adversity. So with or without the pandemic, the work to protect girls and women continues. Because every girl and woman, no matter what part of the world she lives, has the right to live in a society free of any form of violence against her. Thank you.
Hello back, everybody. I hope you've had a lovely comfort break. Next up, we've got Aminata Kamara. Having grown up in London, Aminata moved to Leicester in 2018 to study drama at De Montfort University. In 2012, she was awarded Leicester's Young Person of the Year at the African and Caribbean Achievement Awards, and a year later was nominated for the Women's Startup Business of the Year award by Leicester for Business. Responding to a BBC Radio Leicester call-out, Aminata successfully competed in a blind audition, various pitches, and a live broadcast to land the role of presenting The Vibe, which airs Wednesdays at 8 p.m. So it is my pleasure to introduce Aminata.
Thank you. I remember the moments just before I started to prepare this talk. I had a conversation with a friend and she asked me this question I'm about to ask you. And that's, why is being brave so difficult, yet fear is so easy? Why is being brave so difficult, yet fear, the one thing that holds us back, is so easy? Now, my response to her at this point was simple. When being brave feels like your only option, you simply have no other choice but to be brave. Today, I have for you 4 words that I believe will change the next generation. But that story starts with me, back in April 2015, when I had the bravest conversation of my life. I'd been keeping a secret. And this was a secret that I wasn't ready or prepared to share with anyone. But that secret was about to define the rest of my life forever, so I couldn't hold on to it any longer. I was about to get exposed, and everyone was going to know what I had been doing. And the last person I was ready or prepared to tell was my mum. I remember the moments just before I picked up the phone to call her. Quite similar to how I'm feeling now. My whole body was shaking. My throat was tight. My eyes had filled with tears, and my whole being was just consumed by shame. I picked up the phone and it started with the usual, hello, how are you? What are you up to? And then I said, Mummy, I've got something I need to tell you. And she was like, what? What do you have to tell me? And I just froze. I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. And then she said, you're pregnant, aren't you? And I just said, yes, Mummy. Her words at this point were simple. She simply said, okay, you'll have to marry him. Now, at this point, I was pretty lost and confused. I didn't know if I wanted to marry him myself. And I was quite shocked at my mum's response because she'd never been the kind of parent to force me or make me do anything. And I guess if you're not from a similar culture or background to me, this might shock you as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about my mum. My mum first came to the country in the 1980s. She came to London from Sierra Leone to have a better life for herself. She'd followed in the footsteps of my grandma, who came here in the early 60s, going backwards and forwards, doing secretarial work and cleaning. Now, my mum didn't have a clear picture of what she wanted to do or what she wanted to achieve. She just knew that failure was not an option. Education, achievement, and success was the only priority. So this therefore meant that boys and relationships were completely off the table. These were never ever topics of discussion, except that you leave boys until you finish your education. But this was a little bit different for me. However, I daren't tell my mum when I was growing up that I had a boyfriend. I daren't tell her that there was a boy that I fancied in my class, or that I was seeing someone and it wasn't quite working out, or that there was a guy, my friend, who I'd been dating for a really long time, and we were in love. But that day when I held the phone to my ear, sobbing at everything my life was about to become, me and my mum for the first time had the first of very awkward conversations about sex. She said, "Why didn't you use a condom?" And I just remember wanting the whole ground to just swallow me whole. But as much as my mum had some questions for me, I had a few questions for her. And now at this point, all I knew is that my mum and dad dated back when they were in Sierra Leone. And they had a very fractured relationship from the start. So by the time I was born, my parents weren't together, and my dad has been in and out of my life ever since. My parents, however, did go on to have 2 more children, my younger brother and my younger sister. And over the years, my mum would tell us stories about my dad, but there was still so very little that I knew about their relationship. And it was only when I got pregnant myself that I started to ask my mum some questions, because I felt like my life was falling into a similar pattern to hers. I felt myself becoming my mum, someone who was so determined to become successful in the eyes of everybody else that she couldn't leave a situation that wasn't right for her. So I asked her, what was it about him that made you keep going back time and time again? Was it because you loved him? Did you think he would change? What did Grandma say when you brought him home? Did she want you to stay in that relationship? Were you scared that people would judge you if you left this man and you started a family with someone else? Were you scared that you'd be alone, or that you wouldn't find love again? These brave yet awkward conversations with my mum formed the foundation for a new level of intimacy and humanity that I had never experienced with my mother before. And for the first time, I didn't just see her as my mum. I saw her as a woman, a young woman just like me, trying to do the best for her children. And it was at that point I realized that I needed to be brave. I needed to be courageous. And I needed to have an honest conversation with her and tell her, no, I won't marry him. And for the first time, I uttered these 4 words I'm about to share with you. It stops with me. Now, I have no idea what came over me that day, but what I do remember is that I was tired. I was so tired of performing. I was tired of conforming to these ways of being. And I was tired of letting everything that I was scared of define my life. Now, your story might be different to mine, but can you identify with that feeling of being tired and fed up of living up to the expectations of everybody else, of traditions of stem back generation after generation, ideas of what your friends have of you, of what your partner has of you, of what society has of you, what they expect you to be? I know for me, I got to a point where being brave just felt like the only option, simply because I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Now, there's a shame researcher and speaker who inspires me greatly, who goes by the name of Brené Brown. And she says that vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they are never, ever weakness. And I want to say to you that if you make the choice to enter in and have brave conversations, if you're choosing to be courageous, you are the greatest sign of strength. And that is never, ever a weakness. Earlier, I asked you, why is being brave so difficult, yet fear is so easy? And I think that's because being brave takes courage. And walking in fear is just comfortable. So over the next 5 years, I chose to have uncomfortable conversations and enter into uncomfortable spaces. But I did so in the very everyday moments. So this would be when I'd come down to London and I'd be in the kitchen with my mum, helping her to peel the onions and unwrap the Maggie cubes. I would ask her questions. Or when I'd go into her room and I'd ask to borrow a pair of socks, and I'd just perch on the side of her bed and we'd talk for hours. It would happen when I'd be in Leicester and I'd FaceTime her whilst breastfeeding my daughter, or when I'm in the car driving to work or nursery. I can say this as a woman, that there are many expectations upon us of what we're meant to be and how we're meant to behave. I can also say this as a Black woman, that there are so many pressures from a cultural perspective of how we're meant to be, lest we bring eternal damnation and shame upon ourselves, our family, and our community. But what I learned since those early conversations with my mum in 2015 is that being vulnerable, being honest, and being open is hard. It's so hard. It's uncomfortable, it's crippling, it's messy, and it's hella ugly. But my goodness, is it necessary? It's necessary for growth, and it's necessary for change. And I guess if I didn't have those early conversations with my mum, I would never have been able to understand life from her perspective. I would never have been able to find my voice, and I would never have been able to change the path for my daughter. Now, I remember just before we took this picture, my mum was rushing around trying to get us all together to take it. She was so proud of her family. My grandma equally was so proud that we could stand together as 4 generations of Black women. My grandma passed away shortly after we took this picture, but my mum was able to have her fair share of honest conversations with my grandma. So I've made it a little bit of a habit to say those 4 words anytime I feel myself falling into a pattern of behavior that doesn't feel natural or doesn't feel authentic to me. I simply say, it stops with me. Now my daughter, she's just turned 5 and she's full of personality, she's full of energy, and she's full of sass. And I know that one day she's gonna have some honest questions for me. But more than that, I'm confident that she will grow to be a woman that isn't going to conform to a way of doing things simply because that's just how we do things. She will understand that you can ask questions, that it's okay to doubt, that it's okay to be scared and frustrated, and it's okay to want better. And in that process, she will make mistakes, she will fail, but she will also become successful. And she will also begin to change the path, not just for herself, but for her children. So to me, that's how we change the next generation. Stepping out of all that we've once known and stepping into an open and blank space where we have no idea what the outcome is going to be, but we're still willing to say, it stops with me. Now, my mum actually answered every single one of my questions. She too was brave, and she trusted me with her most vulnerable parts. And for that, I am forever grateful. She also accepted that I wasn't going to marry my daughter's dad, but instead she accepted my way, our way of doing things. 2 first-time parents choosing to navigate this life as co-parents. So I want to leave you with a final quote by Brené Brown, and she says, "We need more people who are willing to demonstrate what it looks like to risk and endure failure, disappointment, and regret. People willing to feel their own hurt instead of walking it out on other people. People willing to own their stories, lives, and values and keep showing up. So could you show up? Have the brave conversation and change the next generation. Remember, all it takes is those 4 words. It stops with me." Thank you.
I tell you what, I don't know why they choose me as a host, because I feel like I'm about to cry every time that I'm listening to these. That was such a beautiful, beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that kind of came to my mind, I do a lot of research in narratives, and there's a thing called a moment of coherence, that moment where too much pressure is there and you have to make a change. And I think your story has demonstrated that better than any other story I've heard as a sort of example. Looking at inspiring the people in the audience today, did those decisions work straight away, or was there some stumbling after making decisions?
Oh, there was definitely. I mean, me and my mum, we grappled with this and we tossed to and fro, but I think my mum, she grew to respect me as not just a child, but as a woman in my own right, an adult. You know, I'm pregnant now, I'm going to be a mother, you know. So I think she let go, and she was able to listen and really hear me out. And I think over the, you know, it's taken 5 years, and, you know, we're still doing it. We're still having these conversations. So it's been a great learning process, but it's that equal level of respect that we've been able to have for one another, where she's asking me honest questions, and, you know, it's been vulnerability. We've both been vulnerable, and I think that's what this takes. It takes us, you know, stepping out of our comfort zone and really stepping into a new space where we have no idea what's going to happen, but we're willing to, you know, to have those conversations.
And how do you feel that you'll be navigating that with your own daughter, in terms of getting things wrong? How do you deal with that as a mom, those emotions that come with allowing her to make mistakes?
I guess it's just knowing that I'm not perfect, and my daughter is only 5, but I try to have a relationship with her where she's comfortable to know that it's okay to make mistakes. Like I want to teach her this, and I want to teach her that I'm not perfect. So I'd like to say, my friend's got a podcast called Failing Out Loud, and I feel like that's my life. I'm failing out loud, and I want my daughter to see that in me, and I want us to learn together. And, you know, in our culture, saying sorry, hearing your mum say sorry is not something you hear often, but I'm learning, you know, from that, and learning to teach my daughter that, you know, that she can, you know, do things wrong, and I can say I'm sorry for how I reacted, and you know, we both learn, and but still she got to respect me because I'm, like, you know, 25 years older than she is. So it's a process.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really inspirational.
Thank you so much for having me.
So next up, we're going to be looking at another video. Now, context for these videos that we're showing today: every year there is a TED event, and part of these TED Women event, and part of these TEDx Women is a celebration all over the globe. We have hundreds of different volunteer groups from around different places in the globe hosting TEDx Women events, all in the space of 1 week. So we all then will host videos from TED, the original TED event, as inspiration of the bigger picture that this event forms as part of. The next video we'll be looking at is from Tracy Young, the co-founder and CEO of PlanGrid. She is doing a talk on embracing female leadership as a strength. And just as a quick trigger warning, there will be some content about miscarriage.
My parents were refugees of communism. Growing up, I watched my mom and dad work 2 full-time jobs without ever complaining, so my siblings and I could live a better life than they did. I was proud to be their daughter, and I understood the immigrant part of my identity well. The female part of my identity, however, was much harder for me to own. I never wanted to draw attention to my gender because I was afraid I wouldn't be taken seriously as a CEO. So I focused my energy on the things that I thought were important, stuff like making my team laugh. I remember I would painstakingly write and rehearse jokes before every all hands. Or I'd be the first one in the office and the last one out because I thought that these things mattered. When I was 6 months pregnant, one of our large competitors reached out wanting to talk about acquiring us. Every startup wants the option to be bought, but it really got under my skin when, during conversations with these strangers who I was negotiating with, their eyes would sometimes wander to my pregnant belly. I went into labor the same night of our user conference. The weeks leading up to the event, watching our team prepare for our big product unveiling, I wondered how many male CEOs would skip their own conference for the birth of their child. I assumed most would, but I kept reasoning with myself that if I wasn't pregnant, there'd be no question whether I'd be there or not, so I have to be there. Forcing myself to parade my 9-month pregnancy, work the halls as host, on my feet for 14 hours was a bad idea in hindsight. The moment I arrived home, my water broke, my contractions started, and I wouldn't hear my son's first cry for another 32 hours. When my baby was 6 weeks old, I went back to work. Our M&A deal had fallen through by then, and I was determined to fundraise a war chest to fight them back. But I was still bleeding from several tears in my vagina from pushing out a baby. To this day, I still ask myself why I rushed back to work when I wasn't ready. And I realize now it was because I was afraid. I was so afraid of what people might think of me as a new mother and CEO. I was afraid that they would think that my priorities had changed. So I pressured myself into proving to everyone that I was as dedicated to the company as ever. I would spend the next 2 months fundraising to secure our war chest. I had a full schedule and I needed to pump milk. But I didn't have the courage to ask for $50 million and ask to use their mother's room. So how does one pump milk on Sand Hill Road? Well, I would park my car in front of someone's super nice home in Palo Alto. I'd undress and extract milk from my breast with a silicone hand pump. It worked out, I guess. We secured a lead investor for our Series C, and then our competitors came back with a revised offer, and we decided to sell to them for $875 million. A few months after the acquisition, I became pregnant for the second time. And shortly after I found out, I had a miscarriage. While with my team, I felt it slip out of me. I went to the bathroom and it fell to the floor. I didn't know what to do. So I just walked back out to the team, pretending as if nothing happened. It took going through infertility, miscarriage, pregnancy, giving birth without any drugs while running a company for me to realize how wrong I was to hide my womanhood as if it's something I'm ashamed of. For so long, I thought I had to be what I thought a good male CEO looked like so that I wouldn't be judged or treated differently. I was so constricted by my belief that businesses value maleness more, and it made me afraid to be a woman, which meant I hid a massive part of who I was from everyone. When I dared to be fully myself, when I dared to trust and share my frustrations and my anger and my sadness and my tears with my team, I became a much happier and more effective leader because I was finally honest in who I was, and my team responded to that. One of the most important side effects of leading as my complete raw self was seeing our culture evolve to a more close-knit and effective version of itself. I remember we had several back-to-back rough quarters. It felt like everything was in shambles. And I didn't have time to prepare for an all hands. And then it was time for me to speak. So I walked up to the mic cold and I started talking openly about my concerns on competition, the mistakes we had made in sales strategy, really exposing the weaknesses of our company. And I asked the team for help. That completely changed the conversation and how we would build and solve problems together. As we collectively brought our full selves to work, we were able to accomplish so much more in terms of revenue growth and the most products shipped the company had seen. And it progressed us from a startup to a medium-sized business. Whoever you are, if you're thinking about starting a startup or you're thinking about leading, do it. And don't be afraid to trust and be yourself completely. I wish I knew that a decade ago and learn from my mistakes. If you find yourself fundraising on Sand Hill, needing to pump milk, go use their nice-ass mother's rooms. Thank you.
Thank you for watching that video with us today. I think one of the reasons why this video was important for us to show today is this idea that we have different sides of ourselves that we show in different kinds of spaces. All are true reflections of ourselves, but the importance is to have a balance, to not push yourself to only exhibit one part of yourself at a time. And one of the things that we often find in workplaces is that there's this idea that because rules are standardized, that makes them equal, when sometimes the standardization of those rules doesn't fit around us and who we authentically are. And as we decide that we want social change, we want to be thinking about the positive ways that we can have confrontation, that actually by being more authentic and open, we actually invite people to take part more. Next, I'm going to hand over to Simon to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Jane. Whether you can stay for us for all of today's event or if you're just dipping in and out, thank you so much for being with us. All of the speakers have given up their time voluntarily today, so please do support them using the hashtag TEDx De Montfort U Women on social media. Our next speaker is the founder and creative director of Opal 22 Arts and Entertainment. An advocate of Black history, she produces thought-provoking projects and outcomes that merge Black history, arts and culture all together. Please welcome our next speaker, Tara Monroe.
Hello. Hi. My name is Tara Monroe, and as Simon's just said, I run an organisation called Opal 22 Arts and Edutainment. We specialise in all things Black history and deliver projects that highlight Black excellence through artistic and historical genres. I'm here today to talk to you about how we acknowledge our privilege and how we use that to assist others. I really started to think about privilege after the murder of George Floyd, when I realised that some people that looked like me had very different opinions about race and identity than I did. Some, although they could acknowledge the stories of the issues of racism, did not identify as Black, but mixed race, when the wider public only sees them as Black. And I wanted to understand why. And I wanted to find out if this had something to do with privilege. So today, we live in a world that's full of inequalities, a world hindered by racism, an issue that impacts all of us, no matter what race or what culture we belong to. These inequalities are defined by cultural and individual privileges. They govern how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about those around us. They develop stereotypes that enable us to make decisions about our expectations of ourselves and of those that we interact with. To try and rectify some of those inequalities, we each have to acknowledge the individual privileges that we all have, whether through race, education, or wealth. We then have to learn how to use those to assist those with less privilege than ourselves. So why is privilege important at the moment? It's like a big subject at the minute. Privilege is power. Patterns of privilege are rooted into the systems that we all participate in. These patterns build paths that we are all drawn to follow, regardless on whether we think about how they affect us or the consequences for others. To really understand and own our privilege, we have to acknowledge that we have it. We have to take a hard look at ourselves and recognise that what we individually see as normal is not always normal for others. And we also have to be willing to give up some of our individual privileges to highlight some of the inequalities that we currently live within. So for myself, as a child growing up in Britain, within a Caribbean family, and being the lightest member of that family, I was completely unaware of the privileges that my light skin gave me to the wider world. I am Black. I've never identified with anything other than being Black, and I don't know anything else. But growing up and venturing outside of my family unit, I found that my Blackness, or my lack of Blackness, meant that I was able to straddle a fine line of acceptability that many of my friends and family could not. Excuse me, sorry. White people took for granted that I must have one white parent and therefore contain certain attributes that could be assimilated to themselves. And through this assimilation comes a level of privilege, something that was afforded to me by the wider public itself. As humans, we navigate to people that look like us, that people that come from similar backgrounds to ourselves. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. I really began to understand the difference between my darker counterparts and myself when I was applying for jobs. Having to fill in that ethnicity section, I realised very quickly that employers had to fill quotas to meet government legislations. And to meet these quotas, they needed to find people that fitted into their narrative of acceptability. My light skin, my ability to talk without any type of cultural accent made me acceptable above my darker counterparts. Now, at first, this angered me. It didn't sit right with me. I didn't appreciate it. And it led me to refuse to fill in those ethnicity sections out of a defiance against the system. Then I thought about it and I made the decision to make the system work for me. If I was going to be the one that they were going to let through the door, then I was going to make sure that I was going to bring others with me. And I was going to give a clear perspective through Black eyes with no apologies. Now, throughout history, this stance has been taken by many others that were a lighter shade of brown. And it shouldn't fall on deaf ears that some of the main contributors that have stood up and been counted in regards to the story of racial inequalities can be considered as lighter skinned. But we have to understand why. And in this country, we currently have the likes of Akala, Afia Hurst, and David Alasaga leading the way on the stories of racial inequalities. There is a reason for that, and that reason is privilege. People of lighter skin tend to be able to straddle the lines of race and culture. Although being Black and being seen as Black, they are the more acceptable versions of Blackness to a white audience. We are given more chances. We're allowed into coveted spaces and often fill in those diversity quotas. This is privilege. This is a privilege that was afforded to us through the days of enslavement, when the white plantation owners gave higher priority to the ones that they had fathered. They developed a colour bar that still taints the way we see ourselves and others to this present day. By not acknowledging this privilege and accepting it in silence makes it appear normal, acceptable, which reinforces the past and makes it harder for those that need it the most. Now, by saying this, I'm not saying that accepting this form of privilege is a bad thing, but it means you're participating in the system. And by being in the system, you can be part of the solution. if you choose to. The people that I spoke about before have chosen to. This is a privilege that should be used to assist others with less. So to conclude, I've tried to explain the privilege I receive as a light-skinned woman. And I ask you to look at yourselves and understand the individual privileges you all have. Acknowledge it. Use it to help others. If I can accept my privilege, then so should you. See it, understand it, and use it to advance the world that we live in. Everyone has a part to play, no matter what race, colour, or creed. We can all open the door for someone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Tara, we have so much respect for yourself and our other speakers today. You know, very, very strong ideas coming through. Can you tell us very briefly why you wanted to take this opportunity today to share your ideas with us?
It's a great opportunity, to be fair. It's such a great platform. Why wouldn't I want to be? You have some great talkers. You have the discussions. I love watching them online, and they always seem to be very concise, very informative, and very forward thinking a lot of the time with the information that's given within them. So to be part of it is a complete honour.
Thank you so much for your time, Tara. Thank you. We're now going to pass back to Jane, who will introduce us to our next speaker.
Hello. Now, our next speaker is a special speaker because she is a student from De Montfort University. Now, last year we had a student competition, and what we found is that actually students were actually very apprehensive to apply to a platform like this. And so it's extra special when we see someone like Nafisa, who is coming next, to be brave enough to come on a platform this bit large and to have a really, really important discussion. Now, Nafisa, is a third-year biomedical student at DMU. She is an advocate for women's rights and mental health awareness, and she's hoping to inspire more people to help make the world a better place. Over to you, Nafisa.
Thank you. So, have your parents ever stopped you from doing something out of the fear of what will people say, or what kind of image would that represent us as parents? For many of my fellow South Asian girls and boys, I can assure you that their answer was yes. When you think of narcissism, you think of celebrities like Madonna or Kanye West, or maybe even Stalin. You know, people who have inflated egos, lack empathy, and view themselves as godlike. You would never imagine that it would be your parents. Of course, I'm not speaking for everyone, but many South Asian parents have narcissistic tendencies, and they do so due to the way that they grew up and the culture that they were surrounded by. So let me start by explaining cultural narcissism. How did these two words that I never thought I would see together come about? It stems from trauma and insecurity. A few characteristics are integrated for survival purposes, whilst others are to help people cope with their insecurities and loss of power. So let's go back to our grandparents' or great-grandparents' generation, put ourselves in their shoes. They had just gained independence from the British Empire, and they'd been through a famine. They'd lost 2 million lives just to the war alone. And if like half of the population was living in poverty, if not more. So you really had to be selfish, and you really had to put yourself first to stay alive. As horrible as it sounds, there wasn't a lot of support for the poor either. So it meant that the wealthier classes formed a sense of entitlement and thought that just because they had the money, that they could, they could get whatever they wanted. Of course, they also felt no moral obligation to share this money and to help the others out. This also meant that they would kind of treat those employed by them really badly because, of course, if you didn't have the money to not be a worker, then you deserve to be treated bad. This kind of trickled down into individual families. So let's say that the man of the family, regardless of his wealth, he was seen as the breadwinner, so he would be the superior family member. So again, he wouldn't treat his wife or his children with a lot of respect. And behavioral traits like these are unfortunately still around today. You might be able to see it with some of your parents. I know I've seen it with some of, my relatives. So coming back to the present, I want to talk about how this has affected our mental health, particularly, first generation immigrant children. Personally, I grew up believing that my worth was dependent on my academic success. So in order to be happy, I had to make sure I was doing well at school and that my parents were happy. I'd grown up hearing that I had to become a doctor since the day I first understood speech. Having any other job otherwise would be worthless. And I believed it because I owed it to my parents. They'd just moved halfway across the globe just so I could get a better education. If I couldn't repay them back by doing a job that they wanted, I was being a bad child. Of course, many of you might be able to relate with it. And unfortunately, a lot of us do believe it because, you think, oh, my parents do so much for me. The least I could do is just listen to them. But it shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't feel guilty about not wanting to do a job that they picked out for you. And you shouldn't feel like you're not worthy of your parents' love if you don't go about their life plan for you. Luckily, as I got older, though, I became more vocal about what I wanted, and I've had many discussions with my about unlearning these behaviors. However, there are many young children and adults who haven't been able to have these. In Bangladesh, suicide alone kills more than 10,000 people a year, with the majority being young adults coming from lower economic backgrounds. So some of the main reasons would be academic success, family pressure, to make sure that you're going to a good school or that you have a good job. And again, unemployment. It's almost as if you don't have a job, you really don't deserve to live. There's this societal obsession with wanting success, money, being, in high positions. Holding those important, again, are very narcissistic traits. So not only are individuals being harsh on themselves because they're not being able to do that, but an abusive society that really holds the importance on these does not help either. Children are constantly being compared with each other, both by parents and their teachers. And sometimes being told that you're not good enough after you've tried your hardest can really be damaging. So, have a think about it. How many times have you heard your parents praising you or, saying that they're grateful for what you've done, even if it's something small? I know I've never heard it, but again, so this lack of gratitude and this sense of entitlement that you should just do it because you are their child is, again, a very narcissistic trait. In some cases, it can even go to the point of parents murdering their children in the name of honor. So Banaz Mahmood was one of them. Her father, uncle, and 3 cousins murdered her because she escaped an abusive marriage that she was forced into. Across the globe, every year, 5,000 women are murdered by their families because they had supposedly brought shame upon them. 5,000 parents and siblings would rather end a life than let their ego or pride be damaged. Unfortunately, the consequences of my culture mostly fall on women. We live in a society that judges them so much more harshly than men, and hence women are given the responsibility to uphold the family's reputation. Bangladesh has the highest rate of child marriages, and I can assure you, not in one case is that child willingly getting married. The main reason being that many families live in poverty, and so that financial struggle really does affect them. And again, it's that financial insecurity. So they'd much rather get their daughters married off so they don't have the burden of having to support her. Others do it so she doesn't have a chance to, bring shame because God forbid she has a boyfriend, or, what if she becomes pregnant and she's not even married? Like, I wouldn't be able to live with myself because of this shame. And it's that kind of mentality that, makes these girls get married at such a young age. In no way is this an attack on our parents as individuals, and I am definitely not trying to villainize them. I just want to reiterate that this is our cultural characteristics, that these are traits that are just so inherently rooted into our culture that it's really hard to kind of separate it out of some of our personalities. And I want to, remind you that they've learned it and accepted it as what is right. So a lot of the time they don't understand what's wrong about it. But again, it's up to us to teach them. We are individuals, we're our own persons, and we're not defined by our parents. We don't have to carry on living in this culture, carrying on these horrible traits. We can unlearn these traits, and that's part of the learning process, as well as educating our parents and the older generation. We can unlearn these traits as well. So for example, like, we shouldn't toxic masculinity and seeing it as men being emotional. I used to think that men crying wouldn't make them a man, but of course that's got nothing to do with how manly you are, just because you have emotions. And again, women, if they don't conform to the norm, they're seen as strange and weird, and it shouldn't be like that. We need to accept everyone as they are and step away from this toxicness. We also need to remind our parents that unlearning these traits does not mean that we are forgetting our culture and our heritage. That if anything, it will make us love our heritage even more if we don't have things like this that make us upset and make us feel worthless. If you answered yes to my question at the start, I urge you to be brave and have these difficult discussions. It takes so much courage to challenge the norm, but it really is up to us to break this generational cycle, to stop honor killings, to stop suicides, to stop child brides and forced marriages. We're progressing, and we are definitely better than what it used to be, but we're still not quite there. So I know we have what it takes to carry on changing it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that talk. It came across to me as being really raw and open, and I appreciate that so much that you brought that to us today. I really like this idea that you sort of presented, where maintaining the respect of the heritage while still being able to go, I want to be able to change and shape this, because culture came about, as you mentioned in your introduction, as a consequence of the environment around us.
Yeah.
And I think so it's so important to see that a lot of stereotypes and other things that come about from people outside of those circles, they're not understanding that context that you've really eloquently explained there. I guess my question to you is, do you have any tips for anyone who's seeing this and feeling inspired of how to start those conversations?
Oh, that is a really tricky question. So when I kind of started having these discussions with my parents, start off small, definitely. Don't go in to the big question straight away, but just pick up on something small, like okay, I hate to say it, but my parents were a little bit sexist, so they'd let my brother do things, but I wasn't allowed to do the same thing. So maybe just start off like, I don't get why he's allowed to do that and I'm not, when it's the exact same thing. What's the difference between us? just things like that, really.
Perfect. Thank you again for talking with us today and for representing our student body as well.
Thank you for having me.
Next, I will pass on to Simon to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Jane. Now, this next talk has a very powerful title indeed. Sarah Higgins gained a first-class honour business degree at DMU back in 1996. Since then, she's been a successful human resources director and now runs her own coaching business. To tell us more about her 7 strategies that will change your life, please welcome Sarah Higgins.
Now, there is only one thing. There's only one thing that will get in the way of anything that you want to achieve, and that's fear. And I'm not talking about fear of spiders or, the fear of danger. I'm talking about things that arise from our fears: shame, worry, doubt, anger, and guilt, blame. And there's only one thing that will mitigate all of those things, and that's love. And I'm not talking about love in the sense of romantic love. I'm talking about love in the sense of compassion, humility, hope, gratitude, and forgiveness. Now, I'm talking about love and fear and all of this in the context of women in leadership. But what I want to talk to you about today, about my experiences and the strategies that I've used in my experiences, they apply to women in leadership and men in leadership. And in all the years that I've used the things I'm going to talk to you about today, they've applied to anybody in any role, in any situation. Now, I've just recently published my book called Power of Love Leadership. But I actually started to use Power of Love Leadership as a model 8 years ago. And I created this model to help the leaders I was working with and that I was coaching. And I created it to help them to think about fear and how fear limits our potential and the strategies based on love that they could use to be more successful, to lead themselves and others in a more successful way. And what I didn't realize at the time when I created this model and I was using it successfully with the leaders I was working with was that I would then go on to use that model to change my life. So, having been using the model with my clients for about a year successfully, I found a personal situation, a personal challenge. My husband and I would already had one daughter. She was about 3. And we then went on to create a larger family. And I ended up having 3 consecutive miscarriages. And I kind of thought I was fine, in the sense of, obviously it's not fine. But I picked myself up, I carried on. I still had my goal of having a big family. I knew I could do this. I felt like I could be resilient and have the courage. But it was then that my husband said after the 3rd one that he didn't want to try again. And it was really difficult, and it was the massive challenge, because everything that I'd wanted to achieve for us as a family, it was like it was no more. That's how it felt anyway at the time. And to everyone in the outside world, I would carry on as normal, and I would put a smile on my face, and I'd pick myself up, and I'd be there for everybody else. But inside, I felt crumpled. I felt distraught. I felt sadness. And more than anything else, I felt angry, resentful, and pretty much anger and resentful were the things that I felt the most. And I realized that having created this model to use with the leaders that I was working with,
If I was going to be any sort of authentic coach, I needed to use it in my own life. And I tell you this, it was hard because the first step in using the model is not to go on and use the strategies first. It's not that easy. The first thing you have to do is you have to say, what is the fear? What is it that I'm feeling and experiencing that's getting in the way? And then you have to say, is it helpful? How is that fear that I'm feeling hindering what I really want to achieve? And then you go on to use the strategies, which I'll look at in a moment. But the reason why this was so hard is because fear overwhelms us. You know, our fear, we're taught that we shouldn't have fear. We're taught to squish it. We're taught that, we're surrounded by fear all the time, but we're actually not taught to embrace it. We're not taught to own it, to talk about it, to be brave about it. And we avoid having that vulnerability. So the strategies that I used, and there are 7 of them, go like this. Number 1, humility. Humility is really powerful when we use it in leadership because it's about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and knowing that that is probably one of the most powerful things we can be as a leader. Accepting responsibility for things we do wrong, seeking feedback, showing our weaknesses as well as our strengths. And I used this with my husband and my daughter because I realized that I was perhaps with that anger and that resentment that I was feeling, I wish it was coming out of me to them. You know, I was trying to be this person to everybody else and be happy and move on and try and get over all of this. But it was seeping out of me in my behaviors towards them. And I realized that I had to be able to say sorry, to my daughter and to my husband, but being able to say sorry to my child when I realized that I had let go of my emotions unnecessarily and let things out on her. Strategy number 2 is compassion. Compassion is where we can understand each other so much that we feel part of one team, one community, one business with one goal. And where we can actually give ourselves time and be kind to ourselves, be compassionate, truly compassionate to ourselves, and speak to ourselves in a way that we would talk to someone else that we love. And I used compassion in my personal relationship in that situation that I was going through to seek to understand what my husband, the decision that he made, and not to blame him. And that meant lots of conversations, difficult conversations that I didn't really want to have, but I knew that I needed to try and understand. Strategy number 3 is enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is about finding the joy, expressing ourselves, showing our passion, and creating that light for others to follow. And it's about having a very clear purpose and vision that we can then show others that way. And I realized that I wasn't finding the joy in the moments of the people that I loved the most, that I was so overwhelmed with that fear that I needed to really tune in to being present and in the moment. So when I was with my daughter and I was playing with her, I had to remind myself whenever the sadness or the disappointment or the feelings I was having were overwhelming me, to put those to the side. No, I'm going to focus right now on being in the moment with her. Strategy number 4 is hope. Hope is about having that light at the end of the tunnel. It's about being very clear on what that light is. You know, very rarely do we have that clarity about where we're going and where we want to be. And as leaders, we think that once we've told people what our vision is, that's it and they know what that is. But we have to constantly remind ourselves of our vision and our goals and where we want to be and involve people in that. And the difficulty I had at the time was that my vision and my goals, which I was so clear on, I had to change them. You know, I wanted a large family. It was all I'd ever wanted. But I had to reposition that goal and that future and that dream. I had to see that I chose to see that future that I wanted would now look different. That it because it was going to be different didn't mean that it didn't have to be as happy. And that being a 3 could be a large family, because I would make it fill my whole life and my whole time, which is what it has. Strategy number 5 is forgiveness. And forgiveness is about, as a strategy, it's about resolving things and renewing our focus on what's really, really important, because we often get so wrapped up in that energy of blame and disappointment in someone else and even ourselves. So we have to learn to self-forgive, to forgive ourselves and to forgive others so that we can move on. And having already been practicing compassion and putting myself in the shoes of my husband and seeking to understand him, that allowed me to forgive. But I also had to work on forgiving myself and not blaming myself for the things that had happened. Strategy number 6 is gratitude. Now, gratitude is about reinforcing the things that are good. It's about remembering the things that we have in our lives that are really important to us. It's about appreciating and showing our appreciation to others. And that can become so overwhelmed when we're so focused on lots of other things going on in our lives. And, I did have a daughter and I had a husband that I loved so completely. I chose every day to refocus on those wonderful things in my life. I chose to focus on what I had and not to be focusing on the things that I didn't. And strategy number 7 is learning. And learning is all about realizing that we don't win or lose, because we always learn. Winning and losing, success and failure, they are words that we as humans, they're a human construct. We put those words onto things to give them a certain meaning. But why? Everything that happens to us is just a thing, an outcome, a result. We should define what those results mean to us. And everything we do, we can learn from and be better as a result. And I had to learn every day to use these strategies. There were good days, there were bad days. There were times when I didn't use them very well, but my persistence and my commitment to keep going meant that probably after about a year, when I look back now, that sadness, that all of that bitterness and that fear, I'd turned it into love and peace and joy. And so in summary, what I learned was that in order to make change in anything, in people around us, in our societies, in our communities, we have to look at ourselves. We have to change ourselves. It doesn't change anything to sit with anger, fear, resentment, blame, frustration. And actually, the hardest thing of all is that we have to become our own detectives of fear. We have to become our own inner coach. We have to look at ourselves, identify our fears, and to not be afraid of fear, to not fear fear itself, but to embrace it, to choose to understand it, to choose to understand how we can then turn that into something else, to use that energy and to find a more helpful way. And so I decided, as I say to you, is use the 7 love strategies. Find how you can use them in your life. Find that fear, understand it and harness it. And don't choose fear. Instead, choose love. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. What you've said today has really struck a chord, and many of us are on an emotional roller coaster at the moment. We're trying to work from home, we're trying to be there for our families and our children at exactly the same time. If people need a bit of help and a bit of reassurance that actually these feelings are okay right now, where can they go to find out more about your work and get help?
So I have a website called powerofloveleadership.com. But more than that, I think the book that I've just created is people are finding it is a real it's a real asset, because what it contains is everything that I've just said today broken down, all of my experiences of using it in the last 8 years, examples of having used it with my clients, obviously anonymously, but also having used it with my daughter as well, who's now 12. And I think it's about tapping into those resources like that and other resources that are available, you know, other books that inspire you, listening to speakers that inspire you, and realizing that it's okay to have those feelings. It's a normal human thing. But it's about knowing how we can then use all of those resources around us to use love instead, and to choose a different way.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your talk today, Sarah. We're really grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is TEDx De Montfort You Women 2020. As we said at the beginning, today's event is brought to you by DMU Women and DMU Works Enterprise, which is the student and graduate enterprise team here at DMU. And if the ideas you've been hearing today have led you to think perhaps maybe you want to start a social enterprise, maybe you want to do something around this, you want to connect with other people, you want to develop some of these skills that you're hearing about, you want to go and start that business like we heard in the talk earlier, we are here to help you. That's the purpose of why we're here. So the best thing to do is if you go onto Twitter and you search DMU Works Enterprise, you'll find a link there, and then you can you'll come through to us. We can help you through one-to-ones. We do workshops, we do events, and we have a big event on the 21st of January, which is very much like today. It's called Entrepreneurship Day. You're going to hear from all kinds of inspiring speakers sharing their stories just as they are today. So we really hope you can join us on the 21st of January as well. We've still got loads more speakers still to come, and we're going to hand you back to Jane now.
Hi, we're just waiting for the slides for our next speaker, but joining on from what Simon was just saying, when I was a student, regularly was in contact with DMU Enterprise, and I can wholeheartedly say I would not be where I am without that support. I think one of the biggest discussions that kind of came up when I accessed the support services at DMU is this idea that sometimes students aren't always aware that these support services are available, which is why events like this are so important in making everyone aware that they exist. But also there's that onus on a student to say to themselves, what do I need? What do I want from my life? And who is it that is going to be able to help me in this mission? And I think there's something really empowering about having that kind of conversation with yourself where you go, I want this, and somebody is going to be out there to help me. And recognizing that your value of doing something great on the course or doing something great elsewhere, people not necessarily noticing it straight away isn't a sign of whether you're doing something great or not. Sometimes having those connections where you go, I'm going to ask for help here, become absolutely tremendous in the help, in the path that you go ahead. So I've taken part in things like Pitch to Win at the university, where I was able to get £1,000 towards trialing something for a business. I've been involved with the Crucible, which is a business incubator program, which Simon is involved with as well. And that was instrumental in helping me launch a business a couple of years ago. And then also events like this, where I'm able to have more of a voice in shaping my values and what I want to be putting out there in the future. And also other events such as getting more BAME students into employment. I've been involved as a filmmaker on a project like that, which has been absolutely phenomenal. So definitely have a look around what services are available at the university and reach out to ask. Simon will be great at being able to show you onto other people if need be.
And did you think you'd ever be hosting a TEDx from your house, Jane?
I didn't. I think there's something more nerve-wracking about hosting it from a house this year, because I don't know how many people could be here. It's kind of an infinite audience, isn't it, this time around?
Oh yeah, And it's, I mean, everyone's doing incredible, haven't they? I mean, the speakers we've had so far today, you know, just literally, it's very raw. There's something very raw about just talking into your laptop camera and sharing the ideas. Our speakers have done so well, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, I sort of suggested this last year, but I wanted to bring it up again. A big thank you to you, Simon, for coming to me with something like this. I think it really shows that there are people at the university who are giving people a platform. And I really felt like that was an empowering thing for you to have done to help me get that. And I feel like I'm now trying to pass that baton on as well to others. So having people like you around has been really, really important.
Do you want to tell people will probably be thinking, you know, you've said a little bit about your work, and people will be sort of interested to know kind of who you are and what exactly it is you do. Do you want to say a little bit about the Curious Observer?
I can do, yeah. So the Curious Observer is a organization who its mission is to use filmmaking and storytelling as a way of helping people with mental health. So the idea is that we all have stories that we hold within ourselves that we could help through things like therapy, but therapy doesn't help us to connect those stories back into our worlds. So the idea is that by having somebody that supports you through that process of learning who you are, learning what you want to share with the world, and then giving you that platform to say it in the right way, in a way that people will interpret in a right way as well, it can be really empowering for the users.
And so it's so powerful and so relevant today. And that's it. If anyone watching this is feeling inspired and they think, you know, actually maybe I have an idea to share, maybe I should do a TEDx talk, can you say something to kind of reassure them that they should go for it? It's not all that bad, is it?
I think that part of this process has been really interesting to see the comments that come from people about that decision to apply in the first place. And I think from all the people that we've had on this process, there is that imposter syndrome feeling about it all. Yeah, as you can see today, the standard has been absolutely phenomenal. And we do support all the people throughout the process of developing and practicing and making sure that they're ready for this event. So I definitely think if you have something that you think you need to say, it doesn't need to be fully polished, but definitely consider getting involved with one of these events in the future.
Yeah, just keep your eyes peeled for announcements about what will be happening in 2021, whether we're doing that in our homes or we might be back on stage. We don't know.
Yes, hopefully we'll be back on stage.
I think we're almost ready for the next speaker, and then after that we'll have another comfort break, won't we?
Yes, so I will do the introductions. Next up we have Natalie White. She is involved with strategic changes in maternity services. She works at both as a local and national advocate for women's maternity services, following her own tragic loss with a pregnancy at 34 weeks. This led her on a journey to make a difference within maternity health services for women and their families. Working with service users, heads of midwifery, midwives, and clinicians has been highly beneficial and rewarding for her, and her main goal is to continue working together to enhance the future of maternity care in Leicester, Leicestershire, and Rutland. She also works with a baby loss charity, which aims to reduce barriers to accessing bereavement services. We really enjoyed seeing her story in her application this year, and I am proud to introduce her as our next speaker.
Hello, my name is Natalie White, Deputy Co-Chair of the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland Maternity Voices Partnership. I'm so delighted to be here with you today, sharing my story and how I became a Deputy Chair of Leicestershire and Rutland Maternity Voices. I entitled this talk, The Way Forward, Bridging the Gap, Striving for Excellence Within Midwifery. My journey. I've always been so very passionate about maternity and midwifery. whilst always having a long life's desire to be a midwife. And this year being called the Year of the Midwife 2020, there's no better time to highlight this great rewarding profession. But my story started in 2016, when already a mother of 2 beautiful, talented children, I became pregnant again. This was such a joyous time for me and my family. And because of the big age gap between the middle child and the youngest, it was such a joyous time. Like, all scans and appointments became a family affair. But sadly, at 34 weeks, this pregnancy ended in a stillbirth. Now, this was such a traumatic experience for myself, and the intense loss was so immense, and I could actually feel physical pain. But after this, I was set on a quest to be an advocate, to be a voice for all women and families who access maternity services. I decided to make this that happened to me into a positive that would impact the whole community. Who we are. We are the Maternity Voices Partnership, and we go on the back of the Better Births initiative. So we just want to make sure that everybody that accesses maternity services have the better birth experience. So we work with service users, getting their feedback, hearing their voices, and relaying that message back to clinicians, midwives, heads of midwifery, to make impactful changes within the services. The MVP, as an MVP, we've co-produced literature that represent Leicester as a diverse community. And we work together to make sure that positive changes have been put forth. I'm also working right now, I've just been put on the new board for the planning for the new pregnancy unit. So I'll be working on that board to make sure that women's voices are heard, so that services are put in place that will reflect our such diverse community. Now, I also thought too that if I can be that bridge, because my message is bridging the gap. So if I could just be that bridge, be that bridge that can make the maternity services a more better, positive place. And I also thought about a bridge. A bridge has to take impact. So I'll put myself forward to make sacrifices and be dedicated to make positive changes for the community. And a few things that I wanted to say. As leading women in Leicester, one thing we have to make sure that we do is self-care, and we have to take it forward. I was on a presentation a few weeks ago, and I was with another lady did a presentation, and she spoke about self-care. Her name's Toyin, and she's from Lewisham. And what the presentation, it was really resonated with myself. So I just wanted to share a bit of what she spoke about. Self-care. As leading women in Leicester, if we want to continue advocating, continue being strong women, we have to make sure that we take into consideration our own self-care, because if we're not well, if we're not in the right mental standing, how can we impact the future? How can we impact those that access our services? How can we impact those that speak to us? Our vision. Our vision is to be a light, to be a voice within Leicester, to be one of the most, my dream is for Leicester to be the best maternity services in England, so that other trusts can look to us for examples. And we've also been working with community leaders, church leaders, just to find out about how we can incorporate, so there's nobody that's left out, no service user that is left out. Our aim is to break down all the barriers, break down all all barriers so that access for all is granted. And that's our engagement is also working with community leaders, heads of midwifery, which I can highly say that I've been able to work with Kerry Williams, Elaine Broughton, heads of midwifery, and their leadership skills has enabled me to be who I am today, and I'm very thankful for that. So look after yourselves, keep on being positive, keep on making that change, be that light in the community that all people will see. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Natalie. I guess the thing that I really resonated with that from that talk was this idea of bringing leadership from different places. And I love that idea. Thank you for that, introducing that to us today, and thank you for the story that comes with you as well.
Yes. Oh, sorry, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also, we've just actually got a student ambassador that's in De Montfort University. She's studying midwifery at the moment, so she's also in the Leicester Maternity Voices. So that's just forging relationships to make sure that we impact midwives, future midwives, with the information that they need.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Just to thank you for you as well. I know you had some slides that we were able to show today, but thank you anyway. I think your speech was absolutely perfect as it was.
Oh, thank you very much.
Next up today, we have another video, and this one is from Madison McFerrin. It's a musical performance. I hope you enjoy.
In 2016, I got asked to sing the national anthem for Hillary Clinton when she won enough delegates to become the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. I only got asked with a couple days' notice, and my busy schedule meant that I couldn't make it to sound check. When I got called on stage and started singing, the room of 3,000 people started singing along with me. And I don't know if you've ever been in this position before, but it felt a little unpatriotic to ask a room full of people singing the national anthem to stop. So instead of singing the version that I had strenuously rehearsed for 48 hours, I sang theirs, and I didn't sound my best. And I was the only one that was mic'd. When I got off stage, my phone had blown up with social media notifications telling me how terrible I sounded, that I'd ruined my biggest opportunity, that I should never sing again. Even Snoop Dogg made fun of me. Needless to say, I was absolutely crushed. But it ended up being the best thing that's ever happened to me. It forced me to go back out there and go after my dreams despite what the internet trolls told me. It pushed me to be my best self. This song is a result of that experience. I hope it inspires you to try. I know it's a fight to try and listen, 'cause I might not know what to say. Selfishly, I'm worried you might run and hide. Selflessly, you're learning. I hold on to pride. No sacrifice comes without mistakes. We could fly. Take a leap of faith. It's time to decide. Try. Out here feeling scared, but at least I'm living unprepared. to walk away. I won't let the same thing stop us every time. But why is it that changing feels like a goodbye, but no sacrifice comes without the stakes. We could fly, take a leap of faith. Look inside, don't you hesitate. We should fly, take a leap of faith. It's time to decide. Try, try, try. What is it you're waiting for? It's time to open up your eyes and see, 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 see. You are what you're waiting for. Just open up your eyes. It's time to see, 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 see. What is it you're waiting for? It's time to open up your eyes and see, see. You are what you're waiting for. Just open up your eyes. It's time to see. It's time to see. It's time to see.
Hello and welcome back to TEDx De Montfort You Women 2020. Before the break, we enjoyed a musical performance, and that was by Madison McFerrin. Whether you've just joined us or if you've been with us all day, thank you so much for being part of our event. TEDx De Montfort You Women, women leading social change in Leicester. Please continue to share your thoughts throughout the final hour of today using the hashtag TEDx De Montfort You Women. Now, our next speaker was awarded an MBE in 2019 as poet and playwright for her contribution to arts and culture here in Leicester. Carol's many other achievements and numerous awards include UK Cultural Olympian 2012 and East Midlands Women's Awards Outstanding Woman for Arts, Media and Music. Now, with everything going on in the world today, it might feel like Black Lives Matter was yesterday's headline, but it's still an issue. It's still as relevant today as ever. Here to share her ideas with us today, we welcome Carol Leeming.
Greetings, everyone. If you want to comment or give feedback on Twitter, my tag is #StarDiva. Just a little bit more about me. I am a part-time lecturer here at De Montfort University, teaching on the Contemporary Theatre module. I was born in Leicester of Jamaican and Antiguan Windrush parents, and you know, I work very much as a multidisciplinary artist, mainly in literature, performing arts and digital media. I would say I have been a committed advocate for the continuing struggle against racism, sexism, and the fight for equalities in general, locally, regionally, and nationally. And I'm a founder member of Leicester Black Sisters, which was a Black feminist group of Black and Asian women. That's part of Leicester's story of the Black community, but also part of Britain's women's liberation movement. And in 2020, I became a patron of East Midlands Women's Awards, celebrating women's excellence and achievement, founded by Sandra Pollock. I'm a mother, a grandmother, and recently a great-grandmother. So I'd like to begin by giving a quote from Septima Ponsetta Clark, a 1960s civil rights leader, a mother of the American Civil Rights Movement and a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People. I quote, "I have a great belief that whenever there is chaos, it creates wonderful thinking." So by way of introduction, I want to firstly talk about and underline the important moment we find ourselves in 2020. We find ourselves in the wake of Black Lives Matter, a worldwide solidarity protest movement due to the police brutal murder of George Floyd in the United States of America. One case, far too many of such cases in the United States of America of Black men and women, for example, Breonna Taylor and Sandra Bland, and many others with regard to their violent deaths at the hands of police officers. We have our own cases of Black men and women's deaths in Britain at the hands of police officers, for example, Cherry Gross and Joy Gardner, or more recently, Sean Duggan. Indeed, this also is a list that is far too long over many decades. Some of these British cases resulted in protest marches, campaigns, and national riots. Black women activists in the United States gave us a slogan, "Say her name," as Black women's deaths on both sides of the Atlantic receive less attention in general in media narratives than Black men's deaths at the hands of the police. And in some cases, Black women not only face potential deadly violence, but also sexual harassment by the police, as stated by Tarana Burke, the Black African-American founder of the original Me Too campaign. As in the early 20th century, I want to highlight and link how the ingenuity, the dynamism, and the courage of Black women has helped to inspire all other women, generally, to push forward, as for example Harriet Tubman or Sojourner Truth, with their courageous actions freeing plantation slaves and their demands for the end of chattel slavery. How this helped to focus and galvanize women's minds on both sides of the Atlantic with regard to their own position in society, which in time led to the development of first wave feminism, both in Britain and the USA. In both countries, this movement actually marginalized Black women, although the movement was linked to abolitionism, and it was also concerned with the basic rights for women, the patriarchy, and systematic racism vis-a-vis slavery. Some key points. In the 1970s, both in the United States and America and Britain, Black women have been at the very forefront of protests, the struggles, and the demands for justice and equality. Some include the civil rights leader, Rosa Parks, or Black liberation, Angela Davis in the United States, or Olive Morris or Claudia Jones, Black rights in Britain. During second wave feminism, Black women, by virtue of what we now term intersectionality, that is, being at the nexus of intersections of race and sexism, homophobia, able-bodism and class, etc., we can begin to locate the role Black women play as leading activists and their struggles to make real change, helping all women to push forward. In the 80s, it was a Black woman, a Black queer woman, Audre Lorde, who rewrote the book on what is now known as second wave feminism, followed by Bell Hooks and Alice Walker and many others. Initially, therefore, it was these Black women that were out in front calling racism and sexism, speaking truth to power. As Audre Lorde wrote, in The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action, I quote, "Your silence will not save you." Or indeed, another Black woman more recently, Tarana Burke, as I previously mentioned, founder of the Me Too movement, who speaks of the similarities between the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter movement. She said, and I quote, "They're both about fighting injustice. Both movements are predicated on undoing systems of oppression," unquote. Over 5 years ago, Hannah Georgis of the Guardian newspaper wrote, and I quote, "The most recent dynamic leadership of Black women is on the front lines and Ferguson and across the United States of America. The radical power of Black women-led activism," unquote. The then Ferguson protests were the original birthplace of Black Lives Matter, founded by several Black women, Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and two further women who were also queer, Patrice Cullors and Darnell Moore. As Cullors stated then, and I quote, "What feels different now is who is at the forefront of the conversation. There is a qualitative difference in whose leadership is being visibilized, and Black women are forcing themselves to the front," unquote. What is crucially important at this juncture is we need to identify ways as Black women, and indeed for all women, to be able to sustain, nurture, and excel whilst maintaining the continuing struggle for justice and equal rights. For this to carry on long after the media spotlight moves and shines elsewhere. So how can we do this in Britain now? I think we need to familiarise ourselves with the voices of young women, to refresh our thinking with gusto, to counteract our battering by the noise of incessant internet culture wars, as eloquently outlined by Nasreen Malik in her excellent book, We Need New Stories, Challenging Toxic Myths Behind Our Age of Discontent. We women can create our own new stories and narratives to challenge, for example, what Malik calls the myth of gender equality, along with the many other toxic myths that we find in our society that she lays out in the chapters of her book. We can also note the shifts in language and discourse around feminism and racism, as exemplified by Rennie Edo-Lodge in her timely book, Why I'm Not Talking to White People About Race. We women can begin to creatively explore the art of protest and joy with our superpower of women's wit, humour, and legendary cunning. For these as new methodologies for activism, a politics of capriciousness or whimsy, to work alongside our earnest street marches, protests, slogans, and demands, or for women's strikes. As successfully done in Iceland, called the Women's Day Off, demanding improved pay and conditions resulting in a higher level of gender parity. Or indeed the women's strike taking place right now in Poland with regard to reproductive rights. Now, Wikipedia tells us of many different protests led by women over the centuries. For example, disarming soldiers, nude protests. We saw a solo woman nude protest thwarting police state troopers this year in Portland, Oregon, in America. Or the way a TikTok makeup session is both pleasurable and actually politicizing young people, young women specifically, at the same time. Or yard bombing, or when we look at the Squad, a solidarity power block of American congresswomen who are ethnically diverse. So taking space, playing games, challenging the patriarchy, women's visibility, our representation, our taking of space and power, and raising women's voices, all of this needs to continue at a pace, whilst also attending to self-care strategies and maintaining networks for our own support. We can discover new, innovative, woman-centered ways to sustain, nurture, and excel and have fun, whilst fighting to overthrow the patriarchy and other systems of oppression. Women push forward. Our struggle continues. Thank you.
Carol Leeming, MBE, thank you so much for your talk, and some huge quotes in there, some truly inspirational sources there. I'm curious to know who inspires you in your work on a day-to-day basis.
I couldn't answer that because I think if I say the statement, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. But I mean, obviously you can take inspiration from my mother and my parents' struggles, but there are so many role models from the Black community on both sides of the Atlantic in all walks of life that I take inspiration from. And this is a way of sustaining. And it's important to say that it's not just about surviving, but it's about how to thrive as well.
Thank you so much again. Thank you. Back to Jane.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you again for that, Carol. I mean, one of the things I really loved about that was the idea of this superpower that we carry. And I think that's something that everyone can relate to, that sometimes things that are normally expressed in a negative tone are actually our biggest assets. I love that. Next up, I will be introducing Lisa Nichols-Drew. She is a chartered forensic practitioner and associate professor in forensic science at De Montfort University. With a practitioner career spanning 20 years, this involved the undertaking of complex investigations, including the forensic laboratory and crime scene examination of sexual assaults, homicide, armed robberies, terrorism, and cold case reviews, as well as training police officers, judiciary, and solicitors. More recently, the award of a Winston Churchill Memorial Trust Travel Fellowship enabled an insight of knife crime responses within Australia and Canada to aid the UK situation. She is currently undertaking a PhD research to assist with issues in the UK criminal justice sector. Over to you, Lisa.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm talking to you about a project that I'm absolutely passionate about, reducing and preventing, and that is UK knife crime. Thank you for my kind introduction. I am an associate professor in forensic science at De Montfort University, and as the kind introduction said, I've been involved in forensic science for 20 years. My work in knife crime research has involved me investigating an international project and implementing that within the UK. As I said, we currently have a huge problem within the UK, and I'm absolutely passionate about reducing and preventing it. And one answer is not difficult, it's not challenging, and it's not complex. In fact, there's a simple solution, and we can all help to achieve this resolution. So today I'm asking, what's the point? Changing knives and saving lives. So for a moment, I'd like you to focus on these images in front of you on the screen. There's a banana, a carrot, and a piece of cake. So let's imagine you're in your kitchen and you're about to perform these typical everyday tasks. Imagine you're perhaps slicing a banana, you're chopping the carrots, or perhaps you're cutting yourself a piece of birthday cake. What kitchen tool would you most likely use to perform these tasks? Well, what first comes to mind may be a knife, and that knife may most likely be a knife with a pointed tip, and it probably looks something like this. So you might be wondering, what is the point I'm trying to make here? Well, unfortunately, from my career history in forensic science and from the data from the Home Office Homicide Index, 39% of homicides from the years 2009 to 2019 actually involve the use of knives. And therefore, stabbing is the most frequently encountered homicide method within England and Wales. And as such, the most used sharp instrument or weapon is actually the kitchen knife. Now, I know how shocking this data is, as it represents the people behind this data. And it therefore raises the question, what are we going to do about knife crime in the UK? Now, if we focus on this image here, this is actually a sculpture called the Knife Angel, and it symbolises just some of the knives in UK society. It's constructed from 100,000 donated blades in knife amnesties, such as Operation Sceptre, which is the national knife crime campaign every November. These knives in the Knife Angel are donated in amnesty boxes around the country, and they cannot harm anyone anymore because the blades have been dulled, so they are no longer sharp. But when we look at the outstretched hands of the Knife Angel, it is as if the angel is actually asking us, why? Why is this happening? And in my opinion, there is one simple explanation. There is a pointless and a fundamental design flaw with kitchen knives in that the blades have pointed tips. The media articles represented here are just a sample representation of knife incident reports relating to the UK knife crime situation. We can see that the concerns that I've raised within my presentation are additionally reflected by accident and emergency trauma consultants, the judiciary, as well as other experts within the criminal justice sector and charities. Here we have a widespread societal issue, and it's in fact a public health issue. As shown in these map diagrams from the Crime Survey of England and Wales, it is not only a regional issue, but it's actually a national issue. And it's not only an urban issue targeting cities, it's actually a rural issue too. Many of you joining us here today will be from the Leicester area and the wider Leicestershire surrounding area. And if we look closely at Leicestershire in particular, we can see that 10 years ago, on the left of your screen, there were considerably lower levels of recorded knife crime as compared to a decade later, as we look towards the right of the screen. In fact, out of all of the counties within the East Midlands, Leicestershire has reportedly the highest level of knife-related offences compared to its neighbours. And as this institution, De Montfort University, is situated at the heart of Leicester, we are committed to supporting this city and the surrounding community with societal issues. We are honoured to be a global partner of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and our SDG is 16, Peace, Justice and Strong Institutions. This therefore aligns to us contributing to crime reduction and prevention. We are also privileged to have had Baroness Doreen Lawrence as our previous Chancellor at DMU, and we are also proud to have the Stephen Lawrence Research Centre within our campus. Here we celebrate the life and legacy of Stephen Lawrence, and we also have a research hub where we can investigate social justice, equality and inclusivity. Now, the tragic circumstances of Stephen's murder involved a targeted street-based stabbing incident, and you may have the impression from the media that street violence is the cause of all knife crime. However, we must also consider that we have a hidden knife crime within the UK. I previously mentioned my background in forensic science casework, and I would like to share with you one of my experiences of a homicide case, alternatively known as a murder case. In this investigation, the alleged perpetrator was the victim's partner. The crime scene was their home, and the weapon was a kitchen knife. Here is a diagram representation of one of the clothing garments from the victim. There are lots of numbers here on this garment, and you might be wondering what the numbers represent. And I'm afraid to say that each number represents a stab hole within the clothing. Now, I know that these images may be upsetting, and I don't share them with you to cause offence or shock or upset. But this is an example of the hidden knife crime that is happening in homes around the UK, and sadly, it's not a one-off incident. 48% of female homicide victims are domestic related within the UK. 71% of homicides occur in a residential setting, such as at home. And in 38% of homicides with a female victim, the alleged perpetrator was the victim's partner or the former partner. My casework experience, along with the rising levels of knife crime within the UK, led to an international knife crime research experience in 2018, where I travelled to Toronto in Canada, amongst other cities within Canada, and also Australia, to investigate the approaches to knife crime in these countries to aid the UK response. This fact-finding opportunity involved engaging with crime scene investigators, forensic scientists, pathologists, police officers, crime scene investigators, and researchers to obtain this unique perspective. The reactive and proactive recommendations from this work were submitted to the 2018 House of Lords Forensic Science Inquiry and were communicated to the all-party parliamentary group on knife crime. There was one outcome in particular which prompted further inquiry, which was, are there alternatives to kitchen knives having pointed tips? And if so, what difference could the blade tip shape have? To investigate this, I formed a collaboration of academics and researchers from the two universities in Leicester, DMU and the University of Leicester, with expertise from the University of Northumbria. This partnership has led to a research study recognised as the first in the world of this kind. This month, November 2020, is significant for us. We are honoured as it has seen the publication of our research work in the peer-reviewed journal Science and Justice, as you can see here, which is actually also my first ever research journal article, and also coincides with Operation SAPTA, the National Knife Crime Campaign. Our experiments within this study involved the use of knives with novel shaped tips in a stabbing motion study of resulting clothing damage. We were testing to see if the shape of a blade tip determines any resulting stab hole occurrence and appearance. As you can see in this coloured chart, this represents our study data, and there is only one knife that is coded green against the 4 garment fabrics that were tested. These garments may be encountered in anyone's wardrobe and were a faux leather skirt, denim jeans, a t-shirt and a jumper, whereas the pointed tip blades penetrated all of the fabrics tested in our study. Blade tip shape really is significant. The rounded tip did not penetrate the fabrics, therefore indicating that it did not result in a stab hole, unlike all of the other knives. Therefore, what we can conclude from this is that as clothing would act as a barrier to the skin, this potentially means that we can prevent injuries. Ultimately, this is of paramount importance, as typical kitchen accidents can be prevented from washing up, loading the dishwasher, retrieving cutlery from the cutlery drawer, as well as avoiding a domestic altercation resulting in a stabbing incident. So as I come to the end of this presentation, let's get back to the point. And what can we all do about knife crime? Well, we can change. We can see here that all of these typical kitchen tasks, the one I mentioned previously, are performed by rounded knives. Here I am showing knives for their intended purpose as kitchen tools. I would like this to be the enduring legacy that we can make a simple social and behavioural change by choosing to have and using rounded knives, and that these can save lives by preventing injuries. I will continue my work in pursuing legislation changes with the government and promoting rounded knives as safer alternatives. And our research has already been quoted in Prime Minister's Question Time. And we can all help to make this change together. Step by step, we can spread the message of rounded knives to our city, our community, our friends, and our families, as it's our homes, our kitchens, and our knives. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that. I think your presentation just makes me sit there and go, why were knives ever having a sharp edge when it seems so simple an innovation to fix such a big problem? And I think that's kind of in itself a way of celebrating the importance of having diverse teams, having people who have that knowledge and that experience, and seeing how it might affect them and the people that they've had contact with through your work, for example, and seeing how that leads to innovations, I think is absolutely fantastic. I had one question for you about moving forward. How has it been? What's the general response to it so far? And do you have sort of any plans of you would like this to end up in the long run?
So we've had international support from colleagues around the world with this research. So it really gives encouragement that there is an alternative to having these sharp knives in people's homes. And moving forward, I hope that we can change legislation, and hopefully we can start to see these knives more widely, and we have more manufacturers producing them as a safer alternative. So we'll keep pursuing it at DMU with our partners. And so I feel that it's a promising step forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today and for being such a great talk.
Thank you.
So we're coming towards the end of our day now. We have one more speaker left to talk to us today, and that is Sarah Thompson. Sarah is the Director of Social Impact and Engagement at De Montfort University. She leads a directorate that focuses on public engagement and curricular student activity. Sorry, I'm not the best reader. Sarah's research focuses on the barriers to the implementation of service learning within universities and how to co-create curriculum within the community. Sarah is committed to embedding social justice practice within higher education and is an advocate of bringing together communities to work in partnership for positive social change. Over to you, Sarah, for our last talk of the day.
Okay, I think I want to start this talk with a question. Why don't we, as women, speak authentically? Which is perhaps answered best with another question. Are we really encouraged to be authentic at all? A few years ago, I approached a coach, which is not uncommon for someone in my position as a woman in a senior leadership role. What is interesting is what I asked her to work on with me. My voice. I wanted training in how to be taken seriously, how to not sound silly or angry, how not to have my ideas ignored in a meeting when I suggest them, only to be adopted 5 minutes later when someone else, usually a man, repeated them. I actually asked her if she could teach me to drop my voice to a lower octave. 2 years later, and my voice is still at the same pitch, excitableness and infuriating enthusiasm, but she has finally helped me to see that my voice is my tool, and instead of trying to hide it or change it, I should use it. Recently, Jo Elvin, who's the editor of You magazine, said the following: "The fact is, we hold men and women to different standards. A man who speaks his mind is seen as strong. A woman who does the same is difficult or annoying. It's a tightrope I've walked for decades now. You constantly try to be decisive without looking bossy. You work hard at keeping your emotions in check for fear of being branded hysterical." Jo also says how she too has bought into this narrative herself and nodded along as female personalities in the public eye have essentially been told to be a little less you. Well, I want to argue today why you should stop being afraid of being you. Stop buying into this narrative. Stop being controlled by the fear of what might happen and allow yourself to be a lot more you. This is not a new phenomenon. Historically, I think that women have been discouraged from activating and regularly using their authentic and real voices. Let me take you back to 1868 and the book Little Women. In chapter 8, Jo talks to her mother about how her anger overcomes her, and her mother's response is as follows: "I've been trying to cure it for 40 years and have only succeeded in controlling it. I'm angry nearly every day of my life, Jo, but I have learnt not to show it, and I still hope to learn not to feel it, though it may take me another 40 years to do so." Cure it, control it, don't show it, and possibly the worst of all, learn not to feel it. Ask yourself the question here: what if Jo's mother's anger is legitimate? What if she's angry about something that she should be angry about? Why on earth should she be trying not to feel it? And who gets to say whether or not she feels angry about something? I remember this quote from when I read Little Women as a young adolescent, and for years it haunted me. Countless times I would feel angry and think to myself, How do I stop feeling like this? I would also say using your precious time for over 40 years on something that is unachievable and, in my opinion, pointless is criminal. Let's stop wasting our time. There are far more important things that we could all be doing. Nell Scoville, who's a writer and director and producer in the US, said in an article for Oprah, "There were times I failed to keep my emotions in check. Frustration was the hardest to contain for me. I cry because I care, and I don't know how to stop caring." Why are we putting effort into trying to stop caring? When did caring become a bad thing? It's not something to be ashamed of, and it's not something we should be hiding. But how often have you hidden the hurt or pain you're feeling at a situation because it somehow feels wrong to show it? We have to ask why it feels wrong to do it and what we're losing by not allowing emotion into the conversation and into the toolkit of how we work and interact with people. Nell Scoville also said, "We talk a lot about the pay gap, which needs to be fixed," and she's right, it does. But so does the emotion gap. Women are not allowed to be as authentic as men at work. So if we're hiding our real voices and we're not being authentic out of this fear of what people will think, why does it matter? Well, I think it matters because our voices are what we use to tell our stories. And if our voices are not legitimate, then our stories are not legitimate either. And if our stories are not told, then our experiences simply do not exist. They're told through different voices and they have no power. Stories and voices are powerful because when they're real and they contain emotions like pain or anger, they connect with people. If we don't use our authentic voices to tell our own stories, then we fail to connect with people. So let's take a look at when women have let these authentic voices come through, who faced down the fear of what might happen and done it anyway. In 2018, Hannah Gadsby's one-woman stand-up comedy show Nanette hit Netflix. This was the show that Hannah herself referred to as her quitting comedy. In it, she stopped telling jokes and instead she told unapologetic stories with truth and purpose. She stopped her own complicity in silencing her own stories and playing the game by the rules written by other people. Instead of laughing about her internal trauma and her experiences of physical assault and rape just to make the audience feel comfortable, she revealed her pain. Nanette is honest, it's truthful, it's angry, it's real, and it's emotional. Hannah revealed in a later TED Talk that she expected Nanette to push her further into the margins of her chosen career field. But instead, through her act of disconnection, the world connected with her and pulled her in. In Hannah's own words, quitting comedy launched her comedy career. In 2014, Renee Edo Lodge published a blog on her website called "Why I Am No Longer Talking to White People About Race." In an interview several years later, Renee spoke about that blog post and what had compelled her to write it. It was written at a point of despair and emotional exhaustion after years of trying to talk to white feminists and people in typically progressive circles about race and getting absolutely nowhere. The post is honest, it's truthful, it's angry, it's real, and it's emotional. It's unapologetic. The blog post took on a life of its own. It resonated with people in a way that Renee says she couldn't have even begun to predict. In 2017, Renee published a book of the same name to critical acclaim. And recently, this book was the first book by a Black British female author to reach the #1 spot in the UK book charts. In 2010, Brené Brown gave that TED Talk at TEDx Houston, The Power of Vulnerability. You may be one of the 49 million people who have watched that talk. In a recent Netflix show, Brené talks about how this talk came into being. The day before she gave it, she said to her husband, "I'm not going to give my usual talk. I'm going to talk about vulnerability. And perhaps more importantly, I'm going to drop the academic armor and I'm going to be vulnerable." She told personal stories about her own breakdown. Her talk is honest, truthful, real, and emotional. After the talk, she describes feeling full of shame, glad it was over, and swore never to do it again. The talk exploded and propelled Brené into the spotlight. So what is going on here? These women took a risk. They should have been cast out and cast aside for daring to be authentic, for ignoring their fears, and for speaking their truth, which is exactly what they all thought would happen. But these three women's experiences are exactly at the point their power exploded. Instead of playing by the game, playing by the rules, using the prescribed language and staying in their allocated lane, they stepped out of it and they stepped up. They brought their whole selves. They were brave. And it didn't end any of their careers. It launched them. Their ability to find their honest, truthful, real, angry, and emotional voices and use them, and to hell with the consequences, set them free. That freedom put them into a different space and created a new connection with their audiences. A connection they'd never previously achieved because they were dancing to someone else's music, singing to someone else's tune. But their own songs, in their own words, were immense. They connected with people, and they were and still are extremely powerful. My message to you today? Throw out the rule book. The rules of public speaking, of business, of social engagement. Spoiler alert, they weren't written by you, and they damn sure weren't written to empower you. We are on someone else's stage. Conforming to these rules prevents our authentic voices from rising up and being heard. So break the rules, find your voice, and own your stage. Be honest and truthful, angry, real, and emotional. Don't follow the advice of Joe's mother and hide your voice and try to control it or not to feel in it. Tap into it and use it. And if you're sitting there thinking, yeah, I want to use my authentic voice, but I don't know what it is or where it is, the next time you are failing to be heard, failing to be taken seriously, or really truly listened to, think about what voice you're using to tell that story. Is it yours, or are you using the unempowering rulebook? Next time you feel something and stop yourself from expressing it because it might not be polite, or you're worried you'll be labelled bossy or aggressive or weak, there she is. That's your authentic voice screaming to be heard. Stop. Listen to her. If she's speaking your truth, then let her out. And just a word of caution to finish. Authentic female voices are powerful. They scare people because people aren't used to hearing them. And when people are scared, they lash out. Don't be surprised if using your authentic voice brings with it some unwanted backlash. Any woman who's used her voice in this way will be all too familiar with the reactions, which can range from an unpleasant smirk in a meeting to a death threat on social media. So be aware of this, but don't let it stop you. With enough of us all using our authentic voices, telling our stories our way, you won't be able to hear the trolls from behind our roar. Be honest, be truthful, be real, be angry, and be emotional. Be you. And as well as setting you free, it might just change the world for us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was an absolutely phenomenal end to the day today. I think you've captured all the kind of values and themes that this event has stood for. And there was a point where you were talking about the legitimacy of your feelings, and I was going, yes, yes. I think kind of my personal reflection on that was this year, I think I've done a lot of reflecting on privilege. And I kind of sit there looking at the typical things of I'm working class, I'm queer, so I've got my own things taken away from my privilege, but obviously I've got things like I'm white, and that gives me privilege. But I actually think the biggest privilege that I have is I was brought up to always speak my mind in my family. I always had those people telling me that that was just the norm, and it's only recently that I've realized that that's not the case for everyone. My question to you with that in mind is, for people who are used to being told to be quiet, what's the first step for finding a way of being more authentic?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I think when I approached this talk, I actually realized that point that you've just made there, that we all come from our own perspectives when we're finding what it is we want to say and how we want to say it. And I think for some people, and for so many reasons that we just don't have time to go into today, it's much harder to find those authentic voices. There's so many factors. They're both external and internal. Now, I can't today do anything to change those external factors, certainly. But in terms of the internal one, I think it is about what so many of the speakers have talked about today. We've used words like truth and bravery and vulnerability and integrity and authenticity, and they all essentially mean the same thing, which is about learning about yourself. And the best piece of advice I could give to anybody is prioritize that. Don't dismiss it and say it's something I can do tomorrow when I've answered these 500 emails. Take time out of your day, of your week, and wherever you can, wherever you get a peace and quiet moment, to really think about who you are and what it is that you've got to say. And once you've worked that out, then being able to say it becomes so much easier, I think.
Thank you so much for that, and for ending our event on such a good high. Next, I'm just going to pass over to Yasmin to draw our event to a close today.
Thank you, Jane. Just a reminder, I'm Yasmin Ali and I'm co-chair of DMU Women, and this TEDx event today was brought to you as a collaboration between DMU Women and DMU Enterprise. Our brilliant hosts, Simon and Jane, have kept you company throughout the day, and I'd like to thank them for their commitment and support in ensuring that we were able to deliver this event to you. We hope that today's event has inspired our listeners across Leicester and beyond. For anyone who feels they have an idea to share, DMU will be hosting 2 TED Talks, a non-women specific one in spring 2021 in July, and our TEDx Women event will take place next autumn around this time again. Please do look out for details how you can apply to be a speaker. We'll hear from you. You can follow us on our Twitter accounts, DMU Women and DMU Works Enterprise. All of our TED Talks from today will also be uploaded onto YouTube within a few weeks, so please do share them with your family, friends and colleagues who couldn't join us today. I'm sure that you'll agree that more and more people need to hear the messages that you heard. We would like all of our attendees from this event to complete a feedback survey, which will be sent to you after the event. This will just make the TEDx conference more relevant, bigger and better. For our speakers, I think it's really important to highlight that this event wouldn't have been possible today without our DMU events team. In particular, Jane Colburn, Holly Jones, Sandra Hendry, and a very, very special shout out to Laura Wilson, who's orchestrated the whole event. Thank you all. Also, our wonderful ITS performance and events team, James Thompson, Daniela Castella-Villamar, and our comms team, Adam Redfern and Sean Bruce, for helping us in not only the technical aspects, but also promoting the event. Thank you all. It's very much been a team effort. For our speakers, congratulations. You've done an amazing job, way beyond the expectations that I think Simon and I had when we first started to talk about this TEDx event. Our aim today was to inspire you, our audience, and raise the voices of our speakers to give them a platform on which to share their incredible light and that they bring to the world. I feel humbled today to have shared this space and time with you all. Our event has made me proud to be a woman, proud to work at DMU and live in Leicester, and also proud to lead the DMU Women Network with my co-chair, Jo Richardson. Our speakers today have taken us on a journey of raising consciousness and hope. Each of the talks have been incredibly emotive, and I'm confident that each speaker connected with each person who's been listening and holding space for them today. So on behalf of our audience, I would like to express our gratitude to our speakers and say thank you. All of our speakers, thank you for showing up even when it was challenging and giving your time alongside honouring all of your other commitments, of which I know there will have been many. Thank you for being open and sharing your raw, very personal journeys. Thank you for being visible and brave and inspiring us all to do the same. Thank you for reminding us to check our privilege. Thank you for teaching us how to push past fear. Thank you for reminding us to take care of ourselves and each other. Thank you for reminding each and every one of us that we are worthy and should have the freedom to be ourselves. Thank you for sharing your voices and giving us the courage so that we can find ours. And thank you for reminding us that we are all leaders in our own right, and we have responsibilities to speak up against injustices, whether that's in our homes, our cultures, or in wider society. We hope to see you all again next year at our next TEDx Women event. In the meantime, please stay safe and stay connected. Thank you so much.